Our brains are wired to compare ourselves to the people around us. Now, this is a problem when you spend a lot of time on social media or on media in general. Really, the only fair comparison is to yourself, maybe yesterday.
I thought I want to lead into a conversation around how women have really been misled around resistance training. But before we get there, I've heard you talk about this on other shows, and I thought it was so beautiful. I just wanted to pause and I wanted to start by asking you about why is it that when it comes to exercise in general, be it resistance training or cardiovascular work, which are both important, by the way, I'm not poo-pooing anything. Why is it that we only focus on how many calories that we are burning? Like when we're on the elliptical machine, let's say, which always overestimate your calories. If anybody is like an elliptical queen or whatever, they always tell you you've burned 4,000 calories when maybe it's been like 300. Yeah. But why is it that we're always focusing on, well, I burned like 400 calories versus what you like to speak about, which is the hormesis, like the hormetics, like the adaptations that you're talking about? Yeah,
I don't think there was any nefarious motivator for this misinformation. I just think that we simplified everything and then made some logical conclusions in terms of what would be like how we should value exercise. So I'm going to take a step back. So obviously, obesity epidemic, we've been in it now for decades. This is actually a national security issue if you look at it from a economic standpoint, and it's a big deal, right? And so government, got involved. We need to help figure this out. People are obese and we're dying of these chronic diseases, and it's expensive to treat. And let's look at the science. And so on a very simplistic, I guess in a simplistic sense, and this is true, what I'm about to say is true. This isn't everything. It's way more complex than this, but what I'm about to say is true. In order to lose weight, you have to burn more calories than you take in. So no matter what, that has to happen for weight loss to occur. Now it's way more complex. What goes into that can be very complex. But at the end of the day, if I'm eating 3,000 calories, I'm only burning 2,000 calories. It's a law of physics. The extra 1,000 calories will get stored as body fat. It doesn't just evaporate, and vice versa. If I eat 2,000 calories, burn 3,000 calories, my body's going to tap into stored calories to make up the difference. So we understood that. So then what we did, and here's where we made the mistake, is we looked at exercise and we said, okay, got to burn more than we're taking in. So with diet, eat less. What about exercise? We're going to look at exercise and figure out how many calories we burn while we do it. And that's how we're going to value exercise. Okay. Whatever burns the most calories, that's the most valuable form of exercise. And that's what we should encourage people to do. Now, I can see the logic there. Now, here's the problem. The problem is it completely ignores the most important factor of exercise, the most important aspect of exercise, which is how it gets your body to adapt. And then what does that mean? That's the most important thing, because that's what sticks around. That's what makes the big difference. The calorie burn, okay, is actually the least important thing. That's all the way down the totem pole in terms of values of exercise. And I'm gonna talk about a study here to kind of illustrate what I'm talking about. There's a famous study done with modern hunter-gatherers, the Hadza tribe in northern Tanzania. Now, they live the way we probably did 30,000 years ago, okay? They're hunter-gatherers, so no modern agriculture, no modern technology. They gather and they hunt, and they're very active compared to the average Westerner. I mean, the way you hunt an animal is you wound it and then you run after it until it gets tired and it dies, and then you take it back. And so that's miles and miles and miles a day, and they walk for miles a day, and they're just very, very active people. And so scientists went down and said, okay, through some pretty sophisticated testing, they tested their metabolic rates. How many calories are they burning on a daily basis? And at the end of the study, they were pretty shocked to discover that the modern hunter-gatherer burns roughly the same amount of calories as the average Westerner, the average couch potato. Now, at first you think, how's that possible? They're moving all the time. They're chasing down animals. They're trying to find food. They're walking after to find water. They're not on watching TV and movies and driving in cars. Like, how is this even possible? Well, if you look a little deeper, it makes perfect sense if you consider human evolution, right? We evolved for most of human history as hunter-gatherers. If you look at the timeline of modern humans, 90 something percent of the time that we've been on Earth, we were hunter gatherers, and our bodies adapted to become efficient with calories, because it makes no sense for a hunter gatherer's body to burn 10,000 calories a day. You can't find 10,000 calories in nature. We would have gone extinct. So the body adapted to burn less calories. And that kind of activity, the running, the walking, the constant moving, tells the body to become more efficient with calories. It's an adaptation process. Same thing that lots of running would do. Now, running has its own health benefits, but if that's all you do and you do lots of it, and on top of it, you cut your calories, what your body does is it learns to burn less calories. It learns to become more efficient. It does this through a couple different ways. The most obvious one being muscle pairing. It actually brings muscle down. And you'll see this in studies. You'll see that people who do lots of cardio with calorie restriction, let's say they lose 10 pounds, 5 of it will come from muscle. Now, the body's not burning muscle. It's paring muscle down. It's adapting. It's making its calorie burning engine smaller so that it can match the calories coming in. That's what your body's always trying to do. It's trying to match what's coming in. Now, there is a form of exercise that does the opposite. Strength training, resistance training, okay? Strength training and resistance training, although in an hour of, you could train like a bodybuilder for an hour, you're not going to burn nearly as many calories in that hour as you will going on a run or a bike ride. That doesn't matter. What matters is the adaptation. What strength training does is it tells the body, we need muscle, we need strength. The side effect of which being a less efficient metabolism, and metabolism that burns more calories. And so when you do something like that, you actually teach the body through adaptation to have a faster metabolism. Now, in modern societies, okay, now 50,000 years ago, you don't necessarily want a super hot, fast burning metabolism. That's a liability. I only can find 1,500 calories a day. I don't want a metabolism that burns 3,000 calories. But we live in modern societies where food is very, very easily accessible, hyper palatable, very convenient. We don't move much on top of it. Fast metabolism is an asset. Like if I could snap my fingers right now and boost everybody's natural metabolism by 50%, we would solve the obesity epidemic, right? We would see incredible progress in health. So strength training does that. It speeds up the metabolism. It's almost like, it's funny. I had a listener write in. They're an investor, and they said, when you talk about muscle and strength training, he's like, that's how I talk to people about money. And I said, what do you mean? He goes, well, you can try earning money, or you can take your money and then invest it so that it makes money for you. He goes, that's what it's like when you build muscle. It's burning calories for you. So, oh yeah, that's exactly what it's like. So we've been led down the wrong path to look at exercise as calorie burning and to completely ignore what those adaptations are. And then to take it even a step further, you brought up that a large percentage of your audience is women. Women have been lied to the most by the fitness industry. There's 2 reasons why. Women are the consumers. We know this. For most markets, women are the largest consumers, so they're going to get marketed to the most. And number 2, gyms had to figure out how to get women in their doors when historically they were places where guys hung out when they first started out, right? Like gyms were not friendly to women. It was just dudes. And what we knew about them was, the beach muscle movies of the 50s and 60s, these big dumb bodybuilders. And then, then you had pumping iron. And
I was going to say pumping iron. Yeah.
Yeah. And so women are like, yeah, I'm not trying to look like that. And it doesn't seem like a very friendly place. And so what gyms did is they, created words like toned, which, that word existed before, but not the way the fitness industry used it. They say you're going to tone muscle, which is, you don't tone your muscle, you build them.
This gives me I get a little twitch when I hear that word, because this is not the way that we describe like muscle. Either you have, when we talk about tone, you're actually commenting on the neurological health.
Yes.
So you either can be hypertonic, hypotonic. That's tone. It's tone of the nervous system, usually the peripheral nervous system, but it can also be axial as well. It can also be central. I hate this word toned when we talk about women, but like in terms of communicating to, anytime I've ever tried to say, well, that's actually a way that you describe nerves, people are like, what? That's not what I mean. I want to look like the girl on, Shape magazine or whatever, or Oxygen or whatever it is.
Yeah, because building muscle sounds like, oh, I don't want to look like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right? So So they created this word toned. Hey, ladies, come to our gym. Don't lift heavy, do 5,000 reps with 2-pound dumbbells and do all of our classes and get on the treadmill, and you'll build toned, lean muscle, or long, lean muscle, which that annoys me too, because
long. Yeah. Yeah.
you can't make your muscles longer. I hate to tell you.
You can't do that.
Attachments are the way, unless you surgically remove, and I don't recommend you do that. So, but so they did this, right? And I remember as a trainer, by the way, when I first became a trainer, I was a kid. I was 1997, and I walked into the gym that I worked out at, and I finally turned 18. I was old enough to be a trainer. I applied, I got hired, and I remember going into the women's area for the first time, because they had a women's area with machines. And I remember even then as a kid thinking how ridiculous. It was the same machines that they had in the regular workout floor. The difference was the upholstery on it was pink. That was the difference. And the dumbbells only went up to 10 pounds and they were also pink. And I remember even thinking then, how condescending. Like you just make it pink and now it's for women. And I remember even thinking then, like, man, they lie. They really do lie.
Yeah.
And they do it quite effectively. No, women should not be afraid of lifting weights. You're not going to build huge, massive muscles. What you will do is speed up your metabolism. And through the process, here's my favorite part. And just, I love communicating this. When you send signals to your body to adapt, and your body and everything is working and it's adapting in whatever way you're telling it to, it organizes its hormones in a way to do so. So what do I mean by that? If I tell my body to build muscle and I feed my body appropriately, so it's got the building blocks to build the muscle, and I'm not under too much stress and I'm getting good sleep, so everything's good. As a man, what my body will do is say, okay, we're ready to build muscle. What hormones build muscle? Testosterone. What other hormones can help? Growth hormone. What else? Let's become more sensitive to insulin, right? In women, you see a balance of estrogen and progesterone. You see cortisol balance, right? Happening better, because high cortisol, not very good for muscle, right? Low cortisol, low energy. You get this nice balance, right? So your hormones actually, because everybody's trying to get this youthful hormone profile. How do I get my youthful hormones, right? Well, here's what you do. One of the easiest ways to do it is get your body to build muscle, because all the hormones that do that and all those hormone profiles that do that are the youthful ones that go into building muscle, and you end up feeling that way. You end up feeling better. Now, on the flip side, I talked earlier about how just tons and tons and tons of cardio plus calorie restriction will cause the body to pare muscle down. Your body will also do that in the opposite direction. If I tell my body to pare muscle down, it's going to organize its hormones to do so. In men, lower testosterone. And you see this in studies. In women, higher cortisol, imbalance of estrogen and progesterone, right? You start to see the hormones organize themselves in that way. By the way, when your body's trying to become more efficient with calories, it also starts to learn how to store body fat better. It actually starts to become a better fat storage machine. So if you train the wrong way or you use the wrong approach, what you'll actually end up doing is this. And I'm about to illustrate what probably 99% of your audience has probably felt before, right? You're ready to lose 30 pounds. You jump on the treadmill, you cut your calories, lost 10 pounds real fast. Oops, I plateaued. Okay, now what do? I know. More cardio, less calories. Oh, lost another 10 pounds, plateaued again. What do I do now? Oh, can I do more cardio? All right, I think I can. Can I cut my calories more? I think I could get down to 1,000 calories. Oh, now I'm down to 30 pound weight loss. I'm eating 1,000 calories a day and I'm running 6 days a week. I can't maintain this. This is crazy.
And I'm miserable.
And it sucks, right?
Yeah.
Now, if you do it the other way, like I'm talking about, if you fuel your body properly, do some strength training, the weight loss is a little slower. And part of that's because you may be losing some fat, but you also may be building some muscle. By the way, if everybody watching this lost 10 pounds of body fat and replaced it with 10 pounds of muscle, they would be smaller. Muscle is I think it takes up something like a quarter less space than body fat does. So you'd lose a quarter size, right? And you'd weigh the same, right? But if you did it the right way, you would notice that your fat loss snowballs. And this is a very realistic thing. I've had this happen quite a few times with clients. At the end of your weight loss journey, you're eating more than you did when you walked into it. And now you can maintain that. Like how much easier is that to maintain, right? It's a lot easier.
One of the things I wanted to add what you just said was testosterone for women as well. Like we often will say, estrogen is sort of like phenotypically female, and of course we do have more relative in terms of our concentrations with versus our male counterparts. But we often disregard testosterone in women. And, as you were saying, it's involved in, maintenance of our muscle. It's involved in libido. It's involved in mental health and clarity. And when we talk about these, women, in particular, the women that because I'm in there, like I'm in my mid 40s. So I have, women in perimenopause that are like, how do you not have hot flash? And how do you, how are you living your life? And so that I can maybe emulate that. What we don't consider for women is the brain effects, let's say, as well as the physical effects that testosterone has in the body. And one of the more natural, of course, you can always have TRT, which is like, still controversial for women, and maybe a separate discussion. But one of the natural ways to improve libido, for women who are in perimenopause, some of the things that I'm often told is like pain during sex, or even at, when testosterone is really low in women, like painful orgasms, like it's very, very uncomfortable for that tissue to contract. So I think it's also really important as a natural means for improving our testosterone levels. And as you're saying, I promise you're not going to turn into the Hulk. Like I competed in figure competitions before I had my boys, and like my goal was hypertrophy. Like I was like packing on the plates like I wanted to get big, and I was working at it several times a week, long hours in the gym. And it's of course there's outliers. There's going to be some women who are more genetically, let's say, inclined to be able to have that type of morphology. But for 90%, 99% of women, that's not going to happen. And that's part of the lie, I think, that we've been told. Like I love pumping iron. Like I love, but that's not going to be me. I'm never going to look like that.
I'm so glad you said that. So two things. Yes, testosterone is a female hormone, just like it's a male hormone. I'm so glad you said that. Just like estrogen is a male hormone as well. In fact, I have a friend who he competed as a professional bodybuilder, and through the process used anabolic steroids, got to the point where his body just didn't produce testosterone, had to go on testosterone replacement therapy, was on it, felt better, and then started to feel really, really bad. Couldn't figure out what was going on. Felt depressed and whatever, even though he was taking testosterone. Got checked. His estrogen was too low because he was also taking an estrogen blocker, an anastrozole. And the doctor's like, you need your estrogen to be higher. So same thing for women. The right balance of testosterone to estrogen is going to make you feel great. No testosterone makes you feel terrible, just like it does in a man, just like no estrogen in a man would make him feel terrible. Now, to what you were saying about building muscle, I'm going to just hammer that home. Okay. I talked earlier about, like, if I lived in the NBA and saw everybody there, I'd think everybody was 7 feet tall. Okay. In real life, I'm going to ask you a question. In real life, forget watching a professional basketball game. I'm talking about you go to the grocery store, you go to the gym, you go to the airport, whatever. How many times in your life have you ever seen someone that's 7 feet tall?
It was one time, and I met Kareem Abdul-Jabbar,
okay,
who is an NBA.
You remember it because it was so rare, right? In your entire life, you saw somebody
just once,
that's 7 feet tall. Okay, that's how rare the muscle building genetics of bodybuilders and female bodybuilders and male bodybuilders are. So, if there's a spectrum, way over here you have musculoskeletal issues, medical issues, like people that have to get treated because they're just not well. And way over here, you have the, genetically gifted muscle builders akin to people who are 7 feet tall. Okay. Super, super rare. Okay. Most everybody is in the middle. Okay. Meaning no matter how hard you train, I tell you what, you can even take all the steroids you want. You're not going to look like a professional bodybuilder. That's a true story, right? That's how rare those genetics are. So don't worry about that. In fact, if you are that person with those super rare genetics, you probably don't even work out and you look like you lift a lot of weights all the time, right? That's not you. You can train as hard as you want. You can train like a bodybuilder. You can do it for years and years and years. And what you'll achieve is a sculpted physique, fast metabolism. You'll get the body that you're looking for. You'll get the body that you say, oh, that's what happens when you run a lot. No, that's actually what happens when you lift weights all the time. So, and by the way, let's say, for you're 1 in a billion, and you do work out and, oh my gosh, I build muscle really, really fast. Okay. It's not going to happen overnight. I used to have clients tell me this, like, well, what happens if I get too muscular, Sal? So you tell me when you think you're too muscular, and then we'll like scale it back. Don't worry about it. We'll just maintain at that point, which by the way, studies show that the amount of volume and training it takes to build muscle, about 1/9 of that is required to maintain. Here's one of the beauties of resistance training, is maintaining muscle is easy. Building it's a little harder. Maintaining it is quite easy. There's also something called muscle memory, which is a real documented phenomenon, meaning if it takes you a year to build 5 pounds of calorie burning sculpted muscle, and that's a year of consistent training, and then you, for whatever reason, stop working out for 2 or 3 months, and you lose it, you'll gain it back in a month or two. It comes back so much faster than the first time. So training your body through strength training, although there's no such thing as permanent fitness results, it lends itself really well to modern life because most everyday people, even those that are consistent, are going to miss a week if their kids are sick or something happens, or they're going to miss a month or whatever. It's the results stick around much longer and they're easier to come back. So it's just really, really good form of exercise for the context of modern life. It's really, really effective. And you don't need to do a lot of it, by the way. The average person, for what they're looking for, 2 to 3 days a week will get you very far. Like that's it. 2 to 3 days a week, you'll get the metabolism boosting, you'll get the sculpt, you'll get strong, like you'll feel amazing. You don't need to do it all the time to get great result. Now, if you want to, eventually you can, but 2 or 3 days. I mean, I had no clients that I trained more than that. Maybe like a few, and these were people that eventually became trainers, but most people 2-3 days a week consistent with me, and they were just like so happy with the success they had.
One of the things that I talk about a lot, I've written a book about it, I know you're writing a book as well, is this idea that your menstrual cycle is also a vital sign, the same way that heart rate, respiratory rate, HRV, all of these, blood pressure, all these sort of things that they would check in a hospital, let's say, if you were checking in. So one of the things that, and you had said it, I was trying to lose weight, and no matter what. And the first thing that I'll tell a woman who is trying to lose weight is, tell me about your cycle. Tell me how heavy your bleed is. Tell me what it's like the week or two before you start your bleed week.
Oh yeah.
Because it's like I sort of jokingly in the books call it like your hormonal report card, because I'm always like all about the A's. So like, can we,
Oh yeah.
What was your report card this month?
Yeah. Can I tell you about my report card this month?
Tell me about it.
I was in Antarctica and I had the most amazing trip of my life, best trip of my entire life, but also metabolically challenging experience because of just like circadian rhythm disruption. And then the food on the boat, even though it was a luxury liner, they didn't really know how to accommodate for like 150 people that were crazy. And so all my friends are just nuts and like super amazing, crazy people. And like, they're all entrepreneurs or investors.
I know quite a few people that were on that trip.
Entrepreneurs, investors, and musicians and performers, just some of the most extraordinary people I've ever met, but we didn't sleep. And there was a lot of vegetable oil in the food. There was a lot of sugar available to eat. And I don't eat a lot of vegetable oil or sugar. So my body started getting swollen and inflamed over the course of the trip. And I started feeling pretty crappy actually by the end of the trip. And I was like, man, this sucks. And my gut wasn't working normally. And so this menstrual period, holy shit, I had the most insane cramps. I had clots. I had all sorts of things. And I know that my metabolism and my like stress levels are so tied to my menstruation. And I also had an argument the weekend before with someone that I really care about that was really kind of intense argument. And I always look at my period as like, what am I processing emotionally? And I had the most painful period one night. I had to get a heating pad and my PEMF device, and I had to like hold it. And I was like, holy shit, I've not felt this level of menstrual cramp in a long time. And I really do think that like, look, it was all worth it at the end of the day, but it was like kind of an overwhelming experience to come back from something that was so amazing and be like, wow, I really stressed my body quite a lot on this trip. Like it was like Burning Man, returning from Burning Man, and wasn't expecting to be like recovering from so many stressors. But I mean, overall, what it reminded me was like, basically, you have to understand one thing about health, and that health is all about capacity and capacitance. And like literally, we eat food, we drink water, we breathe air, it goes into our cells, it powers the electron transport chain that actually creates water and then it also creates an electrochemical gradient, which powers a hydrogen turbine, which creates a battery. And also the movement of charge creates a capacitor. So like when I figured this out, finally understood metabolism, I was like, oh, so, basically health is a product of how much capacitance I have. How much capacity do I have to actually handle the stressor? So fortunately, I was able to come back from this trip. I was able to like commit some time to recovery. It took me about a week to recover completely, to be honest with you. But now, I mean, I'm looking in the mirror today and I'm like, I exercise, I'm eating right. My gut's I fixed my gut with some supplements, and I'm like starting to feel like I'm back to baseline. But we are going to have challenges in life, but we are going to have challenges sometimes that are fun. And the whole point of building health is that we get to spend it sometime. It's like money. You get ATP is money. If you have enough money, you can bounce back quickly from that stress. Like that is the point of building health, is that you get to spend it sometimes. You get to go out and challenge it, and then you get to rebuild it.
Yeah. And I think that that's a beautiful reminder, of how quickly you can, how things can get out of balance, right? And it gives you perspective for, your clients, your patients who are dealing with chronic issues. And like every month, it's like, I feel like I'm being punished because I'm a woman. Yeah. But it's a beautiful, I think sometimes, at least, I mean, I have this tendency where if I'm not experiencing it, I also forget. So someone who's, let's say, starting out in keto, like I've been sort of cyclical keto now for many, many years. But when I first started, I was like, kind of back to like pretending like I'm a man. I was like, Peter Attia can fast for 7 days. I'm going to fast for 7 days.
Totally.
Dom D'Agostino can deadlift 5. I'm going to do this. Like, and I love Dom, like he's been on the show. Like he's a mentor for me, but I've always sort of viewed myself as like, I'm a smaller version of these giants, these titans, right?
We're not.
Definitely not.
Thank
Turns
God.
out we have this thing called the reproductive cycle that's really freaking important. Yeah.
Yeah.
When we say we want weight loss, it's like what you're talking about is body composition change. You want to reduce your adiposity, you want to reduce your fat, but then you want to, as you were saying, put on muscle, because you can be the exact same weight or heavier, but you're going to look better, feel better, function better, and perform better. And I think we've really been sold, a lie around what it takes to change your body composition as well. Like you said something that I really liked. It was like 30 pounds in 30 days or something. It's like, it's like lose 10 pounds in 10 days. It's like, I don't want to lose 10 pounds. That's like organ weight. That's like my brain, my bones getting more, like I'm losing
water.
I'm losing water. And that's not actually sustainable, because the minute that I have any water, it's coming back on. And when we want to lose weight, we want to be thinking about fat. We want to be dipping into our stored energy. We don't want to get smaller organs and frail bones, because that also makes up weight on the scale as well. Right. So love what you're saying. And, to your point around the, programs, kind of adapting to the programs, you mentioned at the top of our conversation, you've taken all of these certifications, and I, like you, am a super nerd. I love learning. And I think I'll always be, as a teacher, I think you have to always be, by definition, learning. Mm-hmm. And there's a science, let's say, to, muscle and body composition and nutrition, which we're going to kind of tuck into in a moment. But there's also an art to it, right? So there's, you may start, like you said, with someone on a rebounder or whatever it is, and then that doesn't work for them for whatever reason. So you have to find an alternative. And that's the sort of the application of the program over time with nuance is where we end up getting the best results. So if you do something for 10 days and you say, oh, it didn't work for me, it's like, well, you haven't done it long enough yet. We would never expect that you would eat one salad and say, you know what, I've optimized my estrogen detoxification pathways now, like for life. Like I'm good now. I'm nutritiously healthy, right? It's the same thing. We have to be consistently applying the intervention. In this case, we're talking about resistance training over a delta, over a period of time where we can begin to see how things are changing and how things are showing up in the body.
100%. Couldn't agree anymore.
Love that.
Well done.
Oh, yeah.
Well done.
Well done.
I like that.
Well done us.
But you want to know what? It's nice to hear because, and it sounds corny, but I want more people doing things that way. Like I want more people, more doctors, more coaches. I mean, how many doctors have you heard just give poor advice? And you're like, no, why are you giving that advice? Like, no, it's important to me that we send a good message out there. It's important to me that even coaches, right? I'm not a doctor. Like I've Dr. Gabrielle Lyons, my functional medicine doctor. I'll send people to her if I need, or Dr. Dwayne Jackson, or people that I trust to handle areas. They're my team, right? And I just want things done better so more people aren't as discouraged. Like if we can get more people off the couch next year, we're living in a better place, right?
Yeah. And I think that, with someone such as yourself, with the caliber of clients that you have, I think that you're probably asked, like, maybe more often than you want, what's the program that Blake does? What's the program that Ryan does or Anne Hathaway does, et cetera. And I think that that's the wrong question. Yeah. I think that the question is, what is the thing that I can do consistently over time that's going to reap the best results so that I can, you mentioned before, get stronger and I can show up for the people that matter to me in my life, husband, kids, career, whatever it is. One of the things that I noticed, at least when I was in my brick and mortar practice, because we would do a lot of physical testing for our incoming patients, was that no one could do a squat properly. And my women specifically, we had a push-up test, and it was like, not on your knees. I want you to do a push-up on your toes, as many as you can do with good form. Rarely would they get to 2. So we have this sort of rampant problem with nobody's knowing how to squat properly. And then women, I think that most women would agree lunges and hip hinges and things with the lower body, like squats and, all of that, are great for shaping our lower body. But I think we don't pay enough attention to the upper body and upper body strength with women, which is why we see so many women who can't do a pull-up and who can't do like the pull movement, let's say, is not optimized, and neither is the push. Like not many women can do more than 5 push-ups.
Right. I think they're automatically afraid that they're going to put bulk on there, right? And listen, and I think that's, and I'm not being sexist here. I'm saying something statistically. I mean, I know more women that have stronger lower bodies than guys, but rarely are you going to see. I'm sorry to say this, but females have a stronger upper body than men. And I think you just said it. Statistically, they do not. I think they're more afraid to go in and to actually train. And I think when you ask me, it's not, and you were right, like it's, what are their programs? I think it's more, what do they do in common, right? Like, what do I have all of them do in common? And the first things that I do when I sit down with them is I ask them about sleep quality. That's like probably number one. I ask them about, new things going on nutritionally, digestion, hydration. Like those to me are really important things. And then I get into activity level, and then the program is going to change, right? It's going to change according to equipment. It's going to change according to inefficiencies on how someone moves, right? If someone can't externally rotate that, that arm, or they have poor thoracic extension, I'll work on that stuff, right? I'll work on that in their movement prep, or prehab, or warm up, whatever the hell that you want to call it. And then after I'm focusing on the kind of unwinding the body and trying to recreate some mobility in the body, then we're getting into the training portion of it. And there are things I have to focus on also, like, what are they interested in? If someone's coming to me, they're like, I absolutely hate doing this. I'm a good enough coach where I can get a very similar response from having them do something that they don't absolutely hate. So I do understand that the entertainment effect is important, but yeah, like when you look at people like Blake or Emily or Cindy Crawford I've worked with, like they're doing farmer carries, like they're doing goblet squats. Like they are, some of them might be, one might be learning to, do a kettlebell swing, and I may never have another one do a kettlebell swing. Why? Because one, it just aggravates them. They're always living in extension. Their low back for some reason just lights up. So I'm not going to be stubborn and say, let's continue to do this. I'm continuing to find out and understand why that happens and focus on those things. But the juice ain't worth the squeeze. Like I'm going to turn around and I'm going to find something else, different to still give them that same response. Pushing sleds. Yes. Pressing, pulling, getting them doing pull-ups. Banded if I have to, maybe in the beginning with the push-up, which I think is one of those foundational movements that we should all do, or we should have the strength to do. But if they can't, we'll have them do it on an elevation. I'm trying to enhance the push-up by talking to them about how push-ups are moving plank and engaging the lats and engaging the glutes and having it move in one piece rather than always going into extension. There are things that I'm tightening up on that in time, I believe a goblet squat, like it's not just about the lower body, like a lot of core there. A lot of upper body has to stabilize that. Like, do we have to have a bar on our back? I did today, but Most people don't have to have that. It's something I enjoy doing and I've earned the right to do. So, again, being strong is something that I feel like a lot of women should continuing to be focused on, right? And not just cardio, cardio, cardio. You know better than anyone. It's like, well, if we develop muscle on our body becomes a little bit more of that fat burning furnace, right? We'll increase that resting metabolic rate, which means we're burning more fat calories at rest. That's important. Is cardio still important? I love cardio. I enjoy it, right? I like getting that mindless sweat, but I'm not in there. If I have to lean out for the cover of Muscle and Fitness, which I might have shot last October, I'm not sitting there like cardio, cardio, cardio. Like my training doesn't change. My macros are a little bit more dialed in and I'm paying attention. Is it HIIT cardio? Well, I might be really stressed out from the amount of training and my nutrition and maybe work and other things. So maybe HIIT cardio isn't the best decision for me. Maybe it is steady state. Well, I heard HIIT cardio was the best for fat burning. It's like these are all minuscule, best. It's like, what does that mean? Like they gave it to a focus group of 10 people and they might've gotten a little bit of a better response to it. There's so many variables that they're not taking into consideration that I need to take into consideration as a coach. If someone's taxed, if they're just fatigued, if they're not sleeping well enough, HIIT cardio might be the absolute worst decision for them. Right. So I think a lot of times we need that coaching element. We can't just look at what's on paper and say, oh, well, so-and-so did it. They're an influencer. They look great. Yeah, but that's what worked for them.
Right. So let's talk a little bit about physique building for women. I know we've been kind of dancing around it a little bit. We've talked about low intensity, steady state. We've talked about high intensity HIIT training. I always get this question and I have a couple of thoughts around it, but I'm curious about your response. One of the things that I remember when I first launched like my first fitness program and I started like, this was like super naive and junior because I thought that everyone was on board with this, but I'm like, okay, so you're going to be eating more calories than maintenance because it was a booty building program. And they were like, all the women were like, what? So my question to you, and so I learned I learned the hard way that telling a woman that she needs to first find out what her maintenance calories are and then eat surplus to that, especially if her goals are hypertrophy, which is what you require in order to build muscle. A lot of women are not comfortable with that. So the question that I get most often is, how do you build muscle but lose fat? Or how do you build muscle in a caloric deficit? And I'm sure you have some thoughts on it. I certainly do, but I would love for you I'm curious to your response around that.
I think building muscle in a caloric deficit is very difficult. I'm not going to say it's impossible. I'm not going to say that I haven't done it, right? For me to be in a caloric surplus over the last 25 years, am I going to tell you I've been in a caloric surplus all the time? Absolutely not. I've probably been more towards maintenance calories into a deficit than I have been in a surplus. And I remember since I really started this, I probably put naturally, probably about 35, 40 pounds of muscle on in my lifetime, which is my lifetime of training, which, since, I'm sorry, let's do the math. And I started when I was 16. So yeah, it's close to 30 years. So I think like most people, that sounds like a lot, but in that period of time, it really doesn't. What I try and do with people is I try and understand where are their calories at, because if a woman's consuming, and I'm just saying women right now, because I know you were saying this is the majority of the people that you work with. If a woman's consuming 1,000 calories a day, which is probably underneath where they should be consuming, right? Would you agree with me? Like most women. Oh my goodness.
Most women are around that. They're around 1,000, 1,200 calories.
Which is why I'm saying that at 100%. It's probably more like, 1,000 to 1,200 calories, but let's just say 1,000 for math purposes. And they go and they find out that their total daily energy expenditure, meaning the total amount of calories that they need, is 2,000. I will never tell that person that they need to be eating 2,000 calories that next day. I might, depending on the individual, have them increase their calories per week, maybe 100 to 200 calories a week, right? So if let's lowball, let's say we increase someone 100 calories a week, which could be, 25 grams of protein one week, 25 grams of carbs another week, granted, 4 calories per gram. So that would come out to 100. That's going to take 10 weeks to get them up to their TDEE. So while I'm doing that, I'm looking at, well, how's energy? How's your energy, right? Is your energy improving? How's body composition? Well, I gained a pound. Well, I'm not too worried about a pound. That's probably water weight. We'll probably get your metabolism and things to speed up a little bit. How's your sleep quality? Sometimes I've actually had specific individuals' body composition improve. Like, oh my God, I haven't lost any weight, but my pants are fitting me looser. I'm like, well, what else is going on? People are commenting, I'm losing weight, but I'm not losing weight. What should I do? Keep doing what you're doing, right? So I take a real simplistic approach there, but I also just understand that, like, you know, it's so individualistic. I have 1,000 people in my challenge this month, and you know, I have one guy that, you know, we've sent him to a nutritionist, one of my in-house nutritionists. We've worked with him over time, and his body just does not do well with a higher level of carbohydrates. I'm a carbohydrate person, right? Like to prep for, you know, my cover in 2018, I just had to look up at it. I was consuming 300 grams of carbs a day through sweet potato and jasmine rice and maybe a little bit of fruit.
It wasn't Haagen-Dazs and cookies.
No, it wasn't Haagen-Dazs. No, it was also so understanding, like, I'm cutting carbs most of the time. I'm like, okay, no, you're cutting bad carbs, but our body still needs that energy. So it really is a tough question to answer because, you know, I do have to go against, you know, my own rule book sometimes and understand that you could try something with someone over time, but, you know, sometimes you got to go against the grain of what it is that the majority of your people follow. But, you know, I can tell you right now that most people that I find that are already in that deficit of 1,000 to 1,200 calories a day, where are you going to go? So when a nutrition comes to me and they're like, to burn body fat, you have to be in a deficit. I'm like, absolutely false. I don't care what nutritionist sits down with me. I don't care what your degrees are. I don't care what doctor you are. Absolutely false. You do not have to be in a deficit to burn fat. You don't. You can clean up your calories because all calories aren't created equal. Some people say they are, but let's face it. If I was to turn around and feed one of your clients 3,000 calories a day through McDonald's, and they're consuming that processed food and that sugar and what that's doing to hormones and what that's doing to sleep quality and energy level and, you know, just overall quality of life, you're going to feel like shit. Right? Excuse my language, but that's what's going to happen. Energy is going to be down. Training is going to probably be crappy. You're not going to feel good. Now, if I'm sitting there cooking for you 3,000 calories a day, which is going to be really difficult to get down, by the way, because when you're doing it through clean nutrition, you know as well as anyone it becomes a lot more.
Well, you have fiber and you have satiety regulators that are
exactly. Thank you. And so now things change a little bit. And 10 out of 10 times, I've never worked with anyone where once we just change those calories, if it's the same number of calories, you will see body composition improvement. Clothes will start fitting you a little bit better. And what are you using to measure also? Like, are you standing on some BS bioelectrical impedance scale that's like, oh, telling me that I'm at 28% body fat? I'm like, yeah, okay, I'm at 28% body fat, sure. Or you like, you know, and even there's other things that I'll go do, like DEXA scans, and like, I've manipulated those numbers. Like I know how to do it. Like you can do it. Like I've gone in for elimination diets and 10 days later coming back in and seeing that my body fat has gone from 9 to 6. Like, really? Did I lose that much body fat in that period of time? So I also think how people are quantifying success is completely false. Right after my cover shoot, you know, they when I went in for a DEXA, my abs were at 5. But my legs were at 9 or 10 because I've done a lot of powerlifting. So that's going to offset my body fat. So when people are like, wait a second, it's saying Donnie's is 7.5. There's no way. No, I am. You're not looking at how much fat's, you know, surrounding my organs. You're not looking at my lower body. You're not looking at it, you know, from triceps to subscap to all these different areas that are going to hold fat on your body differently. We're all different. Every client that you work with is going to hold fat in different places a little bit differently. They're going to respond to training a little bit differently. It really is difficult, but there's all these different ways of measuring. And I think that kind of screws things up also, because then suddenly someone's just using something and they're thinking that's the gold standard.
Why do we care about weight loss and detoxification? What is the relationship between the two? Well, I'm going to talk today specifically around liver detoxification. So this is not just detox that's like some influencers telling you to drink I don't know, cayenne pepper or cabbage for days or whatever. These are not silly influencer detoxes. This is the actual physiological process of detoxification. And why this is important, specifically if you are a woman, is this is going to optimize, obviously, your liver function and your metabolism. It's going to aid in sex steroid metabolism. And it's also going to help you if you are someone who is trying, let's say, the ketogenic diet or any diet for that matter. It is going to, in its ability to augment and upregulate sex steroid metabolism like estrogen, which we're going to talk a lot about today, that is going to help you reduce adiposity. And it's also going to help augment the function of your thyroid, which is also a really important metabolic gland, particularly when we're thinking about weight loss. And metabolism in general, but specifically, I know we're talking about weight loss, so we're going to talk about this in the context of weight loss today. So a couple things. First, we're going to talk about hydroxylation, conjugation, elimination. Oh my, we're talking about the 3 phases of liver detoxification. And basically, the big 30,000 foot view from the trees is that we have all sorts of things. We'll call them toxins. They can be endotoxins, exotoxins. They can be sex steroids like estrogens. And the liver's job is to basically take these toxins, whether they're fat soluble, and then to make them less fat soluble. And actually the end product is so that they become water soluble so that we can excrete and get rid of them. Couple of required nutrients, and we'll talk a little bit about this. In order for detoxification to occur appropriately, you need the full spectrum B vitamins, but in particular, we need riboflavin, niacin, vitamin B6, vitamin B12. We need folate. We need other nutrients like glutathione, flavonoids, phospholipids, etc. in order for us to actually move through the first phase of detoxification. And that is called hydroxylation. And all that is really just adding an OH group, a hydroxy group, to the end of the molecule. So for example, if we look at estrogen, if we're going to maybe let's actually use the example of estrogen all the way through, because estrogen for women and weight loss is very, very important. So when we're thinking about estrogens, of course, we have 3. You'll often hear me refer to them as estrogens, and that's not a mistake. There are 3. We have estradiol, or E2, which is the most abundant estrogen in women in their menstruating years. We have estrone, E1, which becomes more and more prominent for women in their perimenopausal and menopausal years. And then we have estriol. And so estriol is really more of an estrogen that we tend to see in pregnancy. So it's really E1 and E2, and I should maybe accurately denote it as E2 and E1 are the 2 estrogens that we're really concerned about when we're talking about metabolism in a woman, whether she is menstruating or not. And in this first phase of hydroxylation, we will have, for example, with estradiol, we will have 2 metabolites that can be hydroxylated. So we will have 2 hydroxyestradiol, which is often denoted as 2-OHE2, or 4-hydroxyestradiol, denoted as 4-OHE2. And then with estrone, 2-hydroxyestrone, 2-OHE1, and then 4-hydroxyestrone, which is 4-OHE1. And actually, estrone can also have another metabolite called 16-alpha hydroxyestrone as well. So all this to say, hydroxylation is just the addition of an OH group, okay? So hydroxylated estrogens, first, I should say, this is facilitated by specific members of the P450 cytochrome P450 family of enzymes. And these hydroxylated estrogens are collectively known as catechol estrogens. And what's important here is that they can retain biological activity. So, pardon me, I have a little squeak of a cough getting over the vid, which I'll share in a future episode. My voice is just like almost 1 octave lower today. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I may cough and I may take a sip of my water, my bone broth, as we're talking here. So, anyhow, so we have these hydroxylated estrogens that can retain their biological activity, and how they the bioactivity of these estrogens is dependent on the position of the added hydroxyl group. So, for example, there's a couple of different pathways that estrogen can go down. Some are more protective, we'll say, and others are less protective. They're more proliferative, and specifically with the 4-OH pathway, which we'll talk about, this can actually produce more DNA damaging, quinone forming byproducts that can just quicken the aging process for us and slow down detoxification. So just for my clinicians that are listening, your CYP1A1 is going to be the enzyme that produces 2-hydroxyestrogens. It is generally considered an estrogen antagonist. So this is where we are kind of getting into the weeds a little bit. I want to explain this in a way that everybody can understand. So when we say an estrogen antagonist, that means that it does not retain its ability to activate estrogen receptors. Okay, so this is why the 2-OH pathway is often called protective, because we don't always want estrogen activation, particularly when we talk about the 4-OH pathway. This is generally called an estrogen agonist, facilitated by the enzyme CYP1B1. It's generally considered deleterious, as I mentioned, DNA damaging, quinone forming, and it can retain the ability to activate estrogen in the breast. So it can become proliferative in the breast and shut down estrogen receptors in the bone. So that's like a no-no on both sides, right? So this is what we're talking about when we're talking about the first phase of detoxification, which is hydroxylation. We're going to talk about solutions in a moment. The second phase is conjugation. Okay, so conjugation. So after we have these catechol estrogens that have been formed through this cytochrome P450 metabolism, they're going to be subject to deactivation. So remember, we were talking about when we want to detoxify, we want to take compounds that cannot be excreted, that are not water soluble, and make them very water soluble. So this is what is the job of conjugation, these phase 2 conjugation enzymes. And so conjugation enzymes are going to, increase solubility. They're going to facilitate renal and biliary excretion. And there's a lot of different ways that we can go through conjugation. For those of you that are already like, this is way too technical, I hate this. Please stay here, stay with me. I promise the science. I promise you'll love the science as much as me if you listen to this a couple of times, but also to spare you all of the gory details. There's different ways that we can go through conjugation. One is methylation. You may have heard of that before. There's a very famous enzyme, MTHFR, that has become, sort of sounds like a swear word. I promise it's not. This is involved in methylation. This is facilitated by the catechol methyltransferase enzyme, or COMT. We also have glucuronidation and glutathionization via the glutathionase S transferase enzymes. So all that to say is that first part of detoxification, we add an OH group. That's called hydroxylation for the cool cats. Second part is now we're making it much more water soluble via conjugation. And there's different ways that we can conjugate. Okay. So sticking with this estrogen example. So we, for example, if we are looking at methylation in particular, and let's just pretend that 70% of our metabolites have gone down that 2-OH, that protective pathway. We can look at a secondary metabolite called 2-methoxyestrogen as it goes through detoxification, and compare that to 2-hydroxyestrogen to get a sense of, if you can, your methylation activity. So if one of the ways that you can infer methylation activity certainly is by doing genetic testing and looking at some of the genes that are involved in methylation. But if you do something like a Dutch test, you can certainly look at 2-methoxyestrogens and look at the comparison of that metabolite and see what that ratio looks like. So phase 1, phase 2, and now I'm just going to explain phase 3, and then we're going to get into some action steps. And phase 3 is very important. This is the elimination piece. So this is where, and using estrogen, in our continuing example, we have estrogen now that has been hydroxylated, it's been conjugated, and now we have these conjugated estrogens that are put into the intestinal tract, and it meets the estrobolome, which is all to say that this is basically bacteria in the microbiome that are involved with getting rid of estrogen. Now, depending on the levels of beta-glucuronidase, if you have high levels of this deconjugating bacteria, you can actually send these deconjugated estrogens back into the system via intestinal reabsorption. And now your levels of estrogen in this particular example are going to be elevated. And of course, one of the, when we're talking about this in the context of detoxification and weight loss, we want estrogen, the golden rule of estrogen is use it and then lose it. So we want to use estrogen for all of its proliferative and anabolic effects. And then we want to get rid of it. We want to get rid of it via the estrobolome, and then of course out through fecal excretion, etc. But if you have gut dysbiosis, if you have high levels of beta-glucuronidase, you are going to reabsorb estrogen. Now, why is this important? So when we think about why this is important, one of the things that why this matters in the context of weight loss. And I've been focusing on estrogen specifically as I'm trying to explain detoxification, because estrogen levels and estrogen balance in a woman is crucial in her ability to lose weight. So if you are someone who's estrogen dominant, and by definition, in estrogen dominance, we talk about this in the luteal phase of a woman's cycle. So in the second half of your cycle after you've ovulated, if you notice that you have symptoms of PMS, if you have angry and, tender, I used to call my breasts like they were angry at me, like very, very tender to touch. If you have bloating, cramping, mood changes, when you do menstruate, notice that your bleed is very heavy, there's lots of clots in there. This may be a symptom or symptoms collectively of estrogen dominance. And if you are estrogen dominant, you are going to have a proclivity for putting on more adipose tissue or accumulating more adipose tissue. And this, of course, is going to affect thyroid function, as I mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, a very important gland in metabolism. And the more adipocytes you have, so the more fat accumulation you have, you're going to be releasing generally more pro-inflammatory cytokines. So you're going to have this sort of low level of chronic low-grade inflammation. You will also release other things like adipokines, adiponectin, and fat is going to, they're going to be, is an endocrine tissue. We used to sort of think that fat was this like just, inert, jiggly stuff that we didn't want. But this is a tissue that secretes hormones to distant parts of the body. And of course, when we have increasing levels of adiposity, we can also explain, there's sort of like almost a linear correlationship. They're sort of always twinning, obesity and diabetes. So we want to be thinking about estrogen in particular. We want to be detoxifying ninjas when it comes to estrogen, because if we are not getting rid of the estrogen, the circulating estrogen, we are now encouraging a fat accumulation state of affairs in a woman, which is going to necessarily affect thyroid function as well. So as you're accumulating more and more fat, estrogen also is secreted by the adipocyte, or by the adipose tissue, I should say more accurately. And this is also going to affect the thyroid. And specifically, we are going to block the ability of T4 conversion to T3 when we have excess estrogen in the system. So it is very much in your interest to be able to detoxify, particularly the sex steroid estrogen as a woman. And I don't want to, I know we're talking, I don't want this to sort of be like, how would you call this? Fear porn. I don't want it to be fear porn, because estrogen is a very, very important hormone for women. But anything, it's like anything, right? We want the Goldilocks version. We don't want too much. We don't want too little. We want it to be just right. And so, when we think about some of the required nutrients that's going to amplify your detoxification. So I was talking about the B vitamins at the top of our conversation. So riboflavin, which is B2, niacin, B3, B6, folic acid, B12, and other compounds like glutathione. We also have other required nutrients for conjugation. So when we were like that, those are the required nutrients that are really important for hydroxylation. When we get to the point where we're conjugating, so remember the methylation piece, where the glucuronidation piece, the glutathionization piece, we also want things like glycine, taurine, glutamine, methionine. All of these things are incredibly important. These amino acids, N-acetylcysteine or NAC, which is a precursor to glutathione. We want these amino acids to help with conjugation. And so foods so here's where we get into kind of like the how-to piece. Like if you're a woman listening, you're like, okay, I want to lose weight. It's January. It's been COVID for 4,000 years. And now I've been putting on my own COVID-19. Like I've put on 19 or plus pounds. I need to get some of this weight off so that I can be metabolically healthy. One of the things that you can start by doing is optimizing your detoxification. And one of the ways that you can do that, even before you start counting calories and macros, which we're going to get into next week, is start consuming foods that are high. I would counsel you to start consuming meat. Like I am a meat loving woman. And I would say that meat, and not just the muscle, but the organs are all really, really high in all of the compounds that I just listed, all the B vitamins, all the amino acids. It has the full complement of amino acids that you need. And if you're someone like myself who just cannot have organs, like I remember when I was a kid and I was forced to eat liver, it was just like boiled liver and it was disgusting. So I have like a bit of a trauma response to having liver now. And I realize I'm working on it. But in the meantime, I consume desiccated organs. So I use ancestral supplements. And I think we have a discount for listeners of the podcast. I believe it's 10%. And I'll make sure that the code is in the show notes. So I consume desiccated liver almost daily. And I also consume bone marrow. And so ancestral supplements, I take their liver, I take their bone marrow, I do the heart. I have a whole bunch of the other ones, but those are the ones that I take pretty regularly. I think I have their colostrum and the brain sitting around as well. But the ones that I consume every day are liver, bone marrow, and heart, because liver is really nature's superfood. Like it is nature's multivitamin. You're going to get the full complement of everything in there. So highly recommend that you consider that as well. And this kind of gets into this conversation. Like we hear a lot about consuming cruciferous vegetables around upregulating estrogen detoxification. And I am completely in agreement with that. I think that consuming cruciferous vegetables like the broccoli, the cauliflower, the Brussels sprouts, those have been shown to actually pull estrogen detoxification, or estrogen metabolism, maybe more accurately said, down that 2-hydroxy pathway, that estrogen antagonist pathway. So it does not retain the ability to continue to activate the estrogen receptor. So consuming those foods are very important. But one of the things that we do want to be mindful of, particularly in some women, not all women, but some women, especially if you're consuming a lot of the Brussels sprouts and the broccoli seeds and things like that raw, is that can also have a deleterious effect in large quantities on thyroid function. So we want to be thinking about how we can consume more meat products, right? And when I say meat, I mean like the muscle, which is always delicious, always love it, but also the organ of the animal as well. And then how can we incorporate maybe lightly steamed cruciferous vegetables? One of my favorite ways actually to consume cabbage is sauerkraut. I probably have almost with every meal, like just a scoop of sauerkraut on the side. I just love it. And it's fermented as well. So that also changes some of the chemical constitution of it, in that it doesn't have the same effect on the thyroid that maybe a raw cruciferous vegetable might. So we want to be thinking about having cruciferous vegetables that way. The other thing that you want to consider as a woman, particularly a perimenopausal woman. So if you are someone who is in her 40s or 50s, still menstruating, or even actually for my menopausal women, this is important for you as well. You really want to be cautious of consuming too much fiber. And this is where your jaw, you can pick your jaw up off the floor. Because yes, I'm telling you that too much fiber consumption can be deleterious for my perimenopausal and menopausal women. And the reason for that is one of the jobs or one of the functions that fiber has in the gut. I mean, we've talked about all the benefits that fiber has in terms of, attracting water to the stool, softening the stool, all of that, cleaning the intestinal wall as it moves through. But one of the negative effects of consuming too much fiber is that it is also going to get rid of too much estrogen, right? So again, with that Goldilocks, we want not too much, not too little. We want it just right. If you're consuming massive quantities of fiber, you are also probably going to be you are probably driving your estrogen and your testosterone levels and progesterone levels so very low that now you're going to be getting the opposite, which is low estrogen symptoms. So we want to be thinking about moderating our fiber consumption as well. Okay, so meat and organs, that's one of the ways that we can start amplifying our detoxification process. Also through fermented foods like sauerkraut, as I mentioned, cruciferous vegetables. And the fermented foods are also going to be very good in supporting phase 3 of liver detoxification, which is that elimination piece in the gut microbiome. And I'm a really big fan here of, and I've talked about this in the past, these resistant starches. So we get resistant starches from things like raw potato starch, from green plantains, green bananas, cooked and cooled rice, cooked and cooled potatoes. And those are really, really awesome for feeding the colonocytes, feeding the cells in the large intestine so that they can, and to help with controlling levels of beta-glucuronidase so that you can efficiently, in the context of estrogen, eliminate the estrogen where and when it is needed. Okay, a couple other ways that we can detox. So I've been talking a lot about nutritional or chemical detoxification. Certainly other ways that you can amplify detoxification. You can sweat. So I'm lucky enough to have a sauna in my home, and it's actually something that I was using to replicate a fever with my latest infection. I never get sick, but with this big bad bug that shut down the entire world, I was using the sauna daily, and in the beginning, like twice a day, so I could replicate like I was already producing a fever, but I was like, I want to go all in on producing a fever, like, this artificial increase in my core body temperature. So saunas, if you don't have access to a sauna, of course, you can take a bath as hot as you can take it, get under there, stay in there as long as you can. And then once you're done, get some warm woolly pajamas on, get under the covers, and continue to sweat for as long as you can. Same is true for a hot shower as well. You can still replicate sweating in a shower. Of course, you just don't feel that you're sweating because you have water on you. Now, the other way that you can continue to detoxify is to support kidney function, and that's through hydration. So I want you to think of hydration more as an anabolic process, because cells are not able to do their job properly when they are dehydrated. So, in order to grow muscles, you need to be, your muscles need to be hydrated. In order to create maximal ATP, your cells need to be hydrated. In order not to start a stress response in your brain needs to be hydrated. So a general recommendation is at least 2 liters of water, or 2 quarts, if you're American, daily. I would say closer to 3 or 4 is better. I usually take in a minimum of 3, often 4. In the past couple of days, I've been taking 5 or 6 because I'm trying to hydrate. And then other ways, of course, is like your lungs. Your lungs are, of course, the primary source of beta oxidation. This is actually how we burn fat. So breathing is actually that CO2, that O2-CO2 exchange, which of course necessitates good quality air. So if you have been living inside your home, scared that you were going to catch the big bad bug, open your damn windows, girl. Just let me just come out and say that you need fresh air. Often the air inside a home is more polluted than the air outside of a home. And there are natural sort of antibiotic and antiviral mechanisms in nature, even anti-mold mechanisms to sort of keep those things at bay. So open your windows, get outside, even better. But if you're too scared to go outside, or you just are, or you live where I am, where right now it's just bone chilling cold, and you don't want to go outside, I still think you should go outside. But if you don't want to, just open your windows. And then, of course, doing things like diaphragmatic breathing is really important as well. One of the ways that you can train your breathing system is to actually sleep on your stomach. This is actually one of the primary protocols with acute respiratory distress syndrome. One of the things that they'll do in the hospital is they'll flip you over onto your belly because they're trying to induce diaphragmatic breathing. So you can do that at home by sleeping on your stomach. Yes, it's good for you. It's actually amazing for training diaphragmatic breathing. Also, just from a postural standpoint, amazing for maintaining the lordotic curve in your neck, amazing for stretching out the deep flexors in your neck, which get tight because we're hunched over our phones and our computers all day long. And particularly one of the more powerful neck flexors is the sternocleidomastoid, those two big chunky muscles on either side of your neck. It's also involved in contralateral rotation. We won't get into kind of the mechanisms of SCM, but that is a really big neck flexor. And so when you are turning your head to the side, which is, you have to do that when you're lying on your stomach to breathe, you are stretching out one of the SCMs. And of course, we know that you don't stay in one position all night long. You're constantly moving. That's called normal sleep. So that's also another benefit, in addition to training your lungs, because your respiratory system is dependent on a strong and sturdy and toned diaphragm. And when I say toned, I don't mean like a silly fitness model word. I mean, actually, I'm talking about the neurological tone of the diaphragm. We want neurological tone, and we want the muscle itself, which is what it is. It's basically an umbrella that extends, to the front and back of the body. We want adequate tone in that muscle so that it can expand. So sleep on your stomach to tone your diaphragm. And then, of course, if you're not sweating, if you're dehydrated, you're constipated, or you're not breathing right, and your, liver is being asked to process an excessive amount of stuff, you're going to struggle to detox. So we want to make sure that at least some of these parameters are being hit as a precursor to losing weight. So you want to make sure that you're sweating every day. And we talked about hot showers, hot baths, or saunas. Of course, that can also be facilitated by working out, but we're going to talk about working out in depth in February. That's going to be the geeky magic topic for February, which is all going to be about resistance training and building a beautiful body. So you need to sweat. You need to be hydrated, right? So you don't want to be dehydrated. You don't want to be constipated. You want to be pooping once a day. So at least one BM, one bowel movement a day. And you can go back and listen to my conversation with Dr. Mary Party on what the poop should look like, how often you should be going, and we talk all things poop. And we want to be amplifying our liver detoxification, particularly in the context of weight loss as it relates to estrogen.
How long does it take for the weight to fall off with fasting? I'm going to let you go first on that one.
Yeah, I'm going to give the worst answer. This person who asked is going to hate me, but the answer I'm going to give is it really depends.
Yep.
It depends on your age. It depends on your physical your lifestyle, like how active you are, how much general movement, like that non-exercise activity thermogenesis that you're getting through the day, like just general puttering around and walking. Of course, structured workouts as well. Like, are you a cardio bunny? Are you lifting weights? What your, your stress levels like, what your sleep is like, all of those things in addition to fasting is going to be a big determinant in terms of, and when she says weight loss, I'm like a stickler for language. So I'm assuming she's talking about fat loss. Like, she's not talking about reducing her bone density or reducing the size of her brain, right? We're talking about reducing. She wants
her brain reduced.
Yeah, exactly. So it's the adiposity, like she's looking at reducing overall adiposity on the body. So I think that, the first thing I want to say, and this is kind of more of a mindset thing, and this has just been my own experience with fasting, coaching other practitioners, is there's so much bio individuality, and you have to give yourself way more time than you would like.
Yes.
We always are like, oh, you know what? I've been doing this thing for a week. It's not working. I guess fasting doesn't work for me. Well, it's, in the same way, I remember one of my mentors, in chiropractic, he said this beautiful thing. Shout out to Dr. John Minardi. He was saying, when you you're caring for a patient and you have been caring for them, let's say for 6 months. And at the end of the 6 months, they say, Doc, I feel better. And then would you ever say to them, which adjustment was it?
Right.
Which was the one adjustment that helped you? It's like, no, it wasn't the one. It was the cumulative effect of going to the chiropractor, I don't know, 1 time a week, 2 times, whatever it is. You're going to the chiropractor for this program. You're doing your rehab. You're doing your stretches. It's the same with fasting. It's like, you're not going to get where you want in a week, in a month. And I'm going to say, you can make progress. You can make progress in a month. You can make progress in 3 months, in a quarter, in a year. But sculpting the body that you want and reducing overall adiposity is a long-term game. That we see so often, and I see this all the time in the online space, where I'm just like, don't eye roll, like, just, respect everybody. But sometimes you'll see sort of experts say, oh, you can, drink, I don't know, lemon water, and you're going to lose 40 pounds in the next 2 weeks. No. And it's like, I would never want to lose 40 pounds in the next 2 weeks, because that's all muscle. Like, that's cachexia. So I guess I'm not fully answering this, because, I'm a doctor, but I'm not her doctor.
Right.
But I would say that there's a lot of different things that go into losing weight when fasting. Yes. What do you think, Mindy?
Yeah, too many variables for sure. So let me start with the mindset. The first thing is that I would love to redefine what extra weight means and why it's there. Our body is designed so intelligently that when it starts storing weight, we want to villainize it, but literally that extra weight is saving your life. It has to find a place to store extra glucose, store extra hormones, store toxins. And it does it around the back of your arms, your belly, your glutes. And it's doing that instead of putting it around the organs. So let's start with, thank you, intelligent body. I appreciate you storing it there. Now let me see what I can do to go after this storage. Now, with that, if we're going to use fasting as a tool, to me, the first step is get comfortable compressing your eating window. Get comfortable with like a 13-hour fast where you're eating, what would that be, 11 hours, and slowly work on condensing down that eating window, elongating the fasting window. When you get to about 15 hours of fasting, then my question to you would be, are you getting into ketosis? Are you seeing signs that you're getting into making ketones? If you're not, then you got to do there's like 20 million different check boxes that you got to think about. You got to think exactly what you were saying. How's your sleep? What are you doing workout wise? How's your food? Like, we've got to go, and that's where the bio individuality really comes in. And for everybody, it's a little different. Now, if you say, I'm in ketosis, but I'm not losing weight, then my next step would be, if it's a woman, are we fasting according to our cycle? Because if you're fasting at the wrong time, you're actually harming your body, causing your body to hold on to more weight. So make sure you're fasting to your cycle. If she says, I'm fasting to my cycle, then I really go to toxicity. We've got to look at pulling toxins out. So I like to step it out in that fashion, but it starts with not chasing a number on the scale and understanding why the extra weight is there in the first place, and then creating short little steps and hurdles that you got to get over to start to see where weight may drop off of you with fasting.
Yeah, well said. And like that permission and that grace to say, I'm going to give myself a really long runway for this.
Yes.
Like, I've budgeted 3 months, but I'm just going to like double or triple that so that we can, because you're also in that journey. There's going to be, everyone also thinks about, weight loss or fat loss as this sort of linear journey. Like, I'm going to lose 1 weight this week, and then next week I'm going to lose 1 pound, and then I'm going to lose 1 pound the week after. And it's not like that. Sometimes you'll lose 4 pounds in a week, and then nothing will change for 2 weeks. And then maybe another pound will come. It's very non-linear. It's very sometimes very disorganized, or it can appear disorganized to our sort of linear brains that are really, designed to see things in like a stepwise fashion. But you'll notice over time, the net, again, like which is the one adjustment, which is the one fast that, that created the change. It's the accumulation of the healthy behaviors and the habits that are going to get you to where you want to go. And this applies to fast. If it's weight loss with fasting, you're using a tool like, maybe a ketogenic diet or otherwise. It takes a really long time. And I'll throw this in and we'll move to the next one. But I often have women that'll say, like, I've been working out and I don't understand, like, where's the muscle? And it's like, do you know how long it takes to build muscle?
Right.
It takes a really long, years to build mature muscle.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to say that.
And I also want to just point out, if it's a woman that asked this question, which I'm thinking it was, that if you start fasting with your husband, your brother, a male counterpart, they're going to drop weight very, very quickly with intermittent fasting. And we are more complex than that. So also make sure that you're staying in your own lane and creating your own fasting journey for weight loss.
And I often find myself with lots of emails, lots of DMs around weight loss. And I wanted to walk you through a process that is going to help you not only define the goal, but follow it through, because there's nothing more annoying than putting in all the effort in terms of trying to lose the weight, and you can do it for a couple weeks, let's say, and then you fall off. And of course, what happens? You blame yourself. You think there's something wrong with you. And I think as women, we are very much, we have a tendency to blame ourselves. And so I wanted to walk you through, I think one of the most, we're going to get into all the specifics, because I know everyone's like, tell me exactly what you do. Tell me exactly how you work out. Tell me what this is. Tell me that. And I will do all of those things. But we are going to start with the biggest piece of advice that I could give you. And this is going to extend beyond weight loss, but specifically if you have made a weight loss goal for yourself. Weight loss is a mental game. More than anything else, more than the type of diet, more than the type of exercises. All those are important. Your sleep is important. Prioritizing recovery is important. So I'm not throwing shade on those. We're gonna talk about that. But it's also not rocket science, right? Like, we all know that choosing, let's say, chicken or green peppers or eggplant or whatever is better than chips. Right? Is better than the cheesecake, is better than the candy or the whatever. So while we are going to unpack weight loss strategies this month, I wanted to start off with the most important strategy. And this is for you to understand how your brain works, particularly in the face of failure. Okay? Because I know that nobody likes to hear the F word, this early on in their diet, but guaranteed you will fail at whatever diet or whatever program you have set out to do. And it is how you respond in the face of that setback that is actually going to make the difference for you. Okay. And this is the idea. We're going to talk about perseverance today, because most of us run into problems with the consistent application of the intervention over time, right? Like I said, weight loss is not like rocket science, but it is the consistency and application of the consistency over time that reaps the rewards. So often in the new year, I'm already getting DMs on the gram, is we think we're going to get onto a new food plan. Maybe we're going to try keto. Maybe we're going to, do some sort of caloric restriction. Maybe we're going to cut out soda, and we're going to, try to reduce processed foods, like whatever it is. And most of us can actually follow these prescriptions pretty well. Like I mentioned, 1, 2, 3 weeks, like we can follow them until we don't, essentially. And what I mean by that is that anybody can stick to any plan, no matter how restrictive, no matter how painful, no matter how inconvenient, for a certain amount of time. But what happens when we fall off that plan is what I'm actually exquisitely interested in. This is a critical piece for you to understand what's happening in your brain neurally when you fail. And if you can get this, and I'm going to talk about some strategies to help you overcome what I'm about to outline for you neurologically, you are going to be one of the few who can actually set out a goal and achieve it, whether it's weight loss, whether it's revenue, whether it's growing your practice, whatever it is. So let's give an example with weight loss. Okay, let's say you're trying to stick to a caloric deficit, and you have put a 1,600 calorie. I'm just pulling a number here, so that might not be the number for you. But let's say 1,600 calories is the intake that you're going to have, and you've accounted for your activity and your total daily energetic expenditure, etc. So 1,600 is the number you've chosen, and you do really well on 1,600 calories for a couple weeks. And then you don't, right? There's a day, maybe it's a travel day, maybe you're stuck at work late, maybe you have a brunch with a friend, or, maybe it's none of those things. Maybe you just overeat one day, right? Like maybe you're in week 4 of your cycle, you don't know the Estima diet protocol, and you just overeat. And so what happens here, and this is true whether this is, I've seen this in my high profile, in my CEOs that I've worked with, all the way to the general population. When it comes time, so what I often do with my clients is I will, every couple of weeks, I like measurements and I like photos, right? So I like to see progress photos and I like to see measurements. So at least measurements in the waist and hip, but I actually like full body measurements. So usually what happens, whether you're a CEO or you're, somebody may be trying to do a diet on your own, this is the type of languaging that I typically hear. It's like, well, I was doing so well, until last Thursday. And instead of having 1,600 calories, I ended up having like 1,800 calories. And then I just had the case of the fuckets, right? It's like fucketitis. And I just had the whole cheesecake rather than just having the one that I had originally planned for. And that right there is a really interesting neurological phenomenon, right? So obviously eating the one piece of having the one piece of cheesecake and going over your caloric allotment for the day wouldn't really cause you to gain weight. It actually, in the grand scheme of things, doesn't really matter. But eating the whole cheesecake matters, right? And of course, having the whole cheesecake, or, throwing it into the fuck it bucket, as they like to say, because I never say those things. I never swear, even though I've just sworn 3 times in the past 2 minutes. I swear all the time. Okay. So, what happens here is eating the whole cheesecake activates shame, right? Guilt and shame. Like, what's wrong with me? Why did I do this? Why can't I ever stick to anything? Like, I can never follow through on what I start, right? And you might think that having one of those experiences, like overeating one time, like having the whole cheesecake and having those feelings of shame and blame and guilt, would protect us from another incident like that happening in the future. But of course, we know that that's not true, right? You and I both know that that's not the case. I've had times where I'm like, frick, like I've had so much to eat. Like, this is absolutely not what I had planned. And if that were the case, of course, cheesecake companies and the like, wouldn't be in business, because we would have learned our lesson and we would have moved on. We would have chosen the veggies every single time over the chips. What actually happens is we repeat this cycle over and over and over again. And it's so frustrating. Like, if this is you and you're like, God, like that's me. Like, I set out and I'm going to have one piece of cheesecake, or I'm going to have one thing, and then I end up having way more than I had actually budgeted for. This is a shame and guilt and blame spiral. I overeat, I get mad at myself, and then I go and do it again and again and again. And neurologically, we can explain this because guilt and shame, listen very carefully, my Betties, guilt and shame activate an area of the brain that is associated with pleasure. I didn't misspeak. Guilt and shame activate an area of the brain that's associated with pleasure. It actually activates an area called the nucleus accumbens. And this is an area of the brain where we process pleasure, where we process incentive, motivation, positive reinforcement. It's the same area. There's many areas in the brain are involved with addiction, but this particular nucleus is also involved with addiction. So if you have been trying your best to stay under 1,600 calories and you go over it, let's say you have 1,750 or 1,800 or whatever, 1,900, you've all of a sudden broken this imaginary line or this limit or this boundary that you have set up for yourself. And your reward and your pleasure centers are going to be lit up like a fucking Christmas tree. Okay. And you're going to go back for whatever it was that you were trying to avoid. That's the chucking it in the F-it bucket, right? That case of F-it-itis. And this is what we see this with other forms of addiction, right? We see this where a gambler continues to gamble despite losing, right? And they might tell themselves, I just need one more hand, like the next one will turn it all around. A shopaholic, same thing, right? He or she will continue to shop, to make purchases, to shop more as they feel more guilty, right? Or as their credit card debt continues to become more and more overwhelming and more out of reach to be able to kind of pull the reins in and have control over it. And so I share this with you because I want you to know that it is so hard neurologically to change our behaviors. And you might notice this in others, and maybe you notice this in yourself as well. People who love playing the victim. Oh, I have never been able to lose weight because, and then there's an excuse, right? Or I was told when I was younger that I was fat, or I was told when I was younger that I was ugly, or I was told by my mother, my father, my teachers, my preachers, whoever, that I was a certain way. And they keep that story with them, right? Or like I've seen this. I mean, I was told all of those things. I was told that I was ugly. I was told that I was, stupid. I was told all of those things. A woman or a friend, if you see her continually choosing the same type of mate, right? It's the same type of abusive, emotionally unavailable guy, right? Or he or she has the same type of argument, maybe with their spouse or their mother or whomever, over and over and over again. And it's because that the guilt and the shame that they experience by engaging in those behaviors activate pleasure centers in the brain. So back to weight loss. When you've had the whole cheesecake instead of the slice or the half slice that you were planning on, the guilt and shame that you experience makes you want to feed the reward system again. And that's why you repeat this behavior several hundred or several thousands of times. And so this is why I'm sharing this with you for a reason. There's not doom and gloom. It's like, well, my brain, I'm activating, so I'm just going to give up. No. If you set overly restrictive boundaries in your diet, like I'm only going to consume 1,600 calories, you most definitely are potentially, I would say potentially, but I'm going to just be more blunt. You are most definitely setting yourself up for failure until you learn how to deal with the feelings of guilt and shame in your body and how you can prevent the overeating and the self-sabotage in this weight loss game. Now, that's not to say that you can never have more restrictive boundaries in your diet, but you must learn to deal with the activation of these pleasure centers in your body. So the first step for you, should you choose to accept, of course, this is always optional, but the first step in figuring out if you have any of these unhealthy associations or behaviors around food is just, for me, for example, I know that tortillas and guacamole, I don't do well with those. Like whenever there's tortillas and guacamole present, I eat too much. I tend to, so I always liked it. What I'll do is I actually replace the the tortillas with vegetables. But the first thing is for you to notice, do you have any unhealthy behaviors around food or certain foods? I would gander that 99.98% of you listening have some type of unhealthy association with food or behaviors around food that you may want to change. And then, so once you've identified the behavior or the association with that food that you'd like to change, then we want to look upstream, right? Because behaviors are actually never the problem, right? And this is the same with parenting, right? It's never the behavior that we want to correct. It's upstream in the brain. Because your belief systems, the brain, the stories that you hold in your mind, in your brain, around yourself, right? Around your worth, around what you deserve, around your desires, are going to drive some of these negative behaviors that self-perpetuate this loop that you really want to stop, but your subconscious or your unconscious keeps driving it forward. So, little neural hack I want to share with you is around breaking the addiction of shame and its consequences. So, the very first thing I'd like you to do, and this doesn't have to be around food, it could really be around anything, but we're going to stick to kind of the food example because we're talking about weight loss specifically. But this could apply to any type of behavior, any type of shame that you feel, whether it's about your body, whether it's about your capabilities, anything at all. So this neural hack that I want to share with you is to start noticing where in your body, what it feels like when you feel shame. So what the sensation feels like, labeling it, and where you feel, like where does it live in your body? And this is a really powerful little neural hack because the act of body scanning, right? Identifying where it lives in your body, how it feels in your body, and then labeling it and describing how it feels and where it lives, moves the activity in the brain from the nucleus accumbens to the prefrontal cortex. It moves the brain activity away from the pleasure centers that are going to drive some of these negative behaviors and consequences that you don't want, into the prefrontal cortex. And I've talked about the prefrontal cortex on many podcasts before, but just as a quick recap, the prefrontal cortex, and actually I'd say the frontal lobe, of which the prefrontal cortex is a part of, one of the primary functions of the PFC and the frontal lobe in general is to act as an inhibitory to lower brain centers. And in this case, the nucleus accumbens in the pleasure center. So as you strengthen the frontal lobe, as you strengthen the activity and activation capacity of the prefrontal cortex, you will naturally increase the inhibition of the activity of some of these lower brain centers, and thereby will be able to control your behavior. Of course, the other thing that this does, this labeling, right, this identifying where and how and what it feels like, is it brings consciousness and awareness to some of your habits and your attitudes around eating. Right? So many of us eat on the go, right? We eat in cars, we pass by some chips, we put our handful of, that's me with the tortilla chips. Like I see tortilla chips out and I take like 4 or 5 of them and I don't even think about them. And then the next time I walk by, I take 4 more, so unconsciously, or there's, some snack in the office lunchroom or whatever. So being awake and aware to how you feel when you eat certain foods is an important modulator for future behavior. Over the Christmas holiday, my sons, one of my sons in particular, really loves Nutella. So Nutella is basically banned in my house because it's all it is like, it's garbage. But he's had it at his cousin's house and he requested it. So he had a croissant and Nutella, and then I put in bananas so I didn't feel like totally the worst mom ever. Anyway, he had such a bad tummy ache. So, we'll call it GI distress. We had a situation in the bathroom, okay, after he had all the Nutella and the croissants and the bananas that he wanted. But he was actually able to identify the association between having that much palm oil and sugar and all the other crap that's in Nutella, with his bodily sensations. Okay. So if you do happen to, for me, it's like the tortilla that I've been talking about. My son is the Nutella. If you've identified, like maybe it's a comfort food from your culture, that's another thing for me. Like you give me Portuguese codfish balls and like, I'm basically going to marry you because I love them. I have no control. Same with tahini. You give me anything Lebanese and, basically you can have my hand in marriage if you want. But these comfort foods often will bring us back to when we were children, right? When it was like, we weren't thinking about diets or like things were just, maybe potentially easier there. So that's like my little neural hack for you. The other thing I'd invite you to explore, if you feel so inclined to, is to loosen the boundaries a little bit on what you deem is acceptable. So let's go back to that 1600 calorie thing that I was talking about. So instead of trying to just hit right at 1600 or get 1593 or whatever it is, right? Perhaps a better approach here is to look at it like 1600, give or take, 100 or 200. So that way, if you have 1600 calories and then one particular day you have, call it 1750, you're still winning, right? It's still fine. And I think that this approach is going to start to lay a healthy foundation of restoring a normal relationship with food, right? So if you have that 1750 on the day that it's a kind of, you've set this about 1600 caloric goal, this is still a success, right? It's still a success and it won't necessitate beating yourself up around failing. It's not going to activate those pleasure centers and you're not going to go and have the entire pantry. And this is precisely what we want. So, we've all heard about, and, maybe you're thinking about habit formations now, in terms of like weight loss or getting to the gym more often or doing more meditation or whatever it is. We've all heard that it takes about 21 days, about 3 weeks or so to form to solidify a habit. But if you can catch yourself in that little neural hack that I gave you and like, where does it live in your body? How does it feel? And label it. If you can do that 3 or 4 times, maybe you don't have a solidified habit, but you have like a little squeak of a habit. You have a little baby habit that has the potential to solidify if you continue doing it. And all you have to do to solidify that is to keep going. All you have to do is to continue to name it, right? You feel shame. Where do you feel it? And then, of course, that's going to have the offshoot benefit of correcting the behavior before it spirals out of control. So you can remain consistent in your pursuit of that goal, whether it's weight loss or otherwise. Continuous glucose monitoring. Why do I care about glucose? And, if you've listened to previous podcasts, glucose is the molecule of life, right? It is the primary substrate for every single cell in our body. Of course, we've talked about alternate fuels like ketone bodies and things like that, but every single cell in the body has either the ability to, use glucose, and there's some really special organs that make it. So let's talk to me about the chain of events, or maybe just the mechanistic chain of events that happens when we ingest a carbohydrate and to some extent protein as well. We know that when we have protein, there's a bit of an insulinergic spike. But what happens when we eat these, exogenous dietary foods? And then what happens in terms of what are some of the hormones that are released? What happens in the body? And what are some of and maybe you can tie into that, and maybe this is the second question, but what are some of the averages or the ranges that you would like to see those hormones and those glucose levels fall in between?
Yes. So basically, when you eat dietary carbohydrates, you digest them and they ultimately are going to break down into glucose in the bloodstream. And glucose goes into the bloodstream, and then the body basically responds by releasing this hormone called insulin, one of the most important hormones in the body that really is relevant to every single person, no matter what their health goals are. It's an incredible hormone. Almost every single cell in the entire body, 30 trillion of them, have insulin receptors. So it has a lot of functions. And the purpose of insulin is to help cells take up that glucose. And what glucose is, what this blood sugar is it's the fundamental metabolic substrate in our body. And what that means is that it is a substrate that can be transformed into energy in our cells that we can actually use to power our cells. The key thing about metabolism is that every single one of our 30 trillion cells in the body, and that's just human cells. We have about, I think 100 trillion bacterial cells in our body, but human cells. So this is the fundamental thing about metabolism. Every single one of those 30 trillion cells needs energy to function, to do anything, to live, to do any of the functions they're supposed to do. If it's a brain cell, it needs energy to do brain stuff. If it's an ovary cell, it needs energy to do ovary stuff. But you can't just use the glucose. You have to convert it to energy that we can use, a currency we can use, which is generally called ATP. So glucose has to get into the cell, be converted to something that is a currency we can use. And when that process is going well and is efficient, and we're converting glucose properly to energy that we can use, and there's not a ton of excess, we're not creating harmful byproducts, that's a well-functioning metabolism. Our cells are functioning properly. When this process is not working well and we can't get the energy we need in the cells properly, or we're gumming up the cells with this excess byproduct of energy creation, we get dysfunction. We get cellular dysfunction. The cells don't work properly. And when cells don't work properly, tissues don't work properly, organs don't work properly, that's where symptoms arise. And so the reason that blood sugar and problems with blood sugar and problems with metabolism underlie almost every chronic condition we're seeing in our country, literally the 9 of the 10 leading causes of death in the United States are related to dysfunctional blood sugar in some way, is because this is a core pathway. It's a pathway relevant to every cell type. And really where this problem, this fundamental core problem is showing up is where symptoms, might emerge. If it's happening again in the ovary, it might look like polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is the leading cause of infertility in the United States, which is fundamentally a glucose problem in the ovary. If it's happening in the brain, it might look like dementia. If it's happening in the heart, it might look like heart disease. So how do we get those problems? Well, this is the interesting thing. When we eat too much glucose, day in and day out, we're constantly sort of spiking our glucose because we're eating too many dietary carbohydrates. The body's tasked with producing tons and tons of insulin to get all that glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells. And what happens over time is that the cells get overwhelmed. They can't process all this glucose. And so the cells actually say, stop, I don't want to get more of this into the cell. So the cells become resistant to that insulin signal. So now the bodies actually have to push out more insulin to try and drive that glucose into the cells. And this is where the wheels start coming off the bus and things are problematic. Now you've got this block to insulin. Glucose can't get into the cells as efficiently. Glucose starts to rise in the blood. And that whole energy process, it's like there's too much of this energy substrate, but we're not using it properly. And that's a real problem. This is where metabolic dysfunction starts arising. And this is really the path towards diabetes and these other related conditions. The interesting thing is, for many people, weight is an issue. And we've got 72% of Americans who are overweight and obese. Well, a really interesting thing about insulin is that aside from its function of essentially pulling glucose out of the bloodstream into the cells, its other function is to tell the body not to burn fat for energy, because fat is the other way that we can generate energy in the body. It's really, we have the option of use glucose or use fat. But when glucose is around, we use that preferentially because that insulin's around saying, don't use fat. So you can imagine you get into this situation where you've been eating a lot of carbs, which is normal in the American diet. The vast majority of our calories come from refined carbohydrates these days. You're getting all these glucose spikes. You're getting all these insulin spikes. You start generating that insulin resistance. The body's then pumping out more insulin to try and overcome that. Now you've got high insulin levels at baseline. And what are you not going to do in that situation? Burn really any fat. So it's just this really interesting cycle that ultimately gets us really dependent in these high insulin states, getting dependent on burning carbohydrates for fuel. And we kind of become these metabolic carb addicts, but we're not even doing a good job of it because we become insulin resistant. So it's just this really fascinating cycle. And this is why focusing on our blood sugar levels and making sure that we're keeping our blood sugar levels more stable over time, and therefore ideally keeping our insulin levels more stable over time, means that we stay sensitive to the signal. And when we do have carbs in the body, we're able to process them, convert them to energy, move it through the system. And when we don't have a lot of glucose around, our insulin levels are nice and low, and we can tap into fat burning for energy. And that's that beautiful state of metabolic flexibility. But it requires that we don't overload the system day in and day out with these dietary carbohydrates that ultimately will make us insulin resistant. So that's kind of the big picture around those things, and why there's just a lot of value to zeroing in more on understanding how our food is affecting our blood sugar levels.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about, I'm going to just shelf that just for a minute, because I definitely want to get into how food specifically, and I can share a little bit about what I've learned from wearing CGM. But before we get there, I think it's interesting to define some goalposts for us, meaning that, if we were to think about if we were to look over a 24-hour period, is there, a mean fasting 24-hour glucose that we might look to, to hit, or to get within reach? Or is there, a daily or a range, like a postprandial, or, after you eat something, is there a postprandial range, ideal range that you'd like to, is it, 140 milligrams per deciliter or less, or, and there's a lot of sort of delineation around HbA1c levels and fasting glucose levels and postprandial levels being 100, at the 2-hour mark being under 140 milligrams per deciliter. Is that, in terms of your research and in terms of the data that you've accrued at levels, are there ranges that you like to see over a 24? Is there a mean 24-hour level of glucose, fasting glucose, that you like to see in a range?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And the reality is that there's unfortunately not standardized ranges that have been put forth by the governing bodies at these. So like the American Diabetic Association or the International Diabetes Federation, IDF. And the reason for that is twofold. One is that we haven't had access to continuous glucose monitors for very long. And so there hasn't been as much research really characterizing these 24-hour trends. And secondly, unfortunately, we don't do a really good job of studying healthy people in our biomedical research often, because again, it's this bias towards focusing really only on when disease emerges and less on understanding like how to keep people healthy. And so there's very few studies of basically healthy individuals wearing continuous glucose monitors and understanding their blood levels. But there are about 6 or 7 that have done that. And so I can speak to those. So that's where they've taken healthy populations, put CGMs on them, and just kind of looked at what happens with their glucose levels. And what you find is that really for about 90 to 95% of a 24-hour period, people are staying within a range of about 70 to 120 milligrams per deciliter of glucose. Some of the studies that have slightly less healthy or older populations show that it's more between 70 and 140. But the main takeaway is that it's very unusual if you are a non-diabetic individual to go outside of that 70 to 120 or 70 to 140 range, depending on the study. That is, an interesting thing to know, because it's actually different than what we would expect from some of the more standardized diagnostic criteria. So one of the standardized ways to determine whether you're non-diabetic, pre-diabetic, or diabetic is an oral glucose tolerance test. And that's where you're basically asked to chug 75 grams of this glucose drink, which is like the grossest thing. It's this horrible orange drink. And then they measure your glucose at basically an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours, and look what happens to your glucose. And basically, if your glucose is going to go up, obviously, but if you're below 140 milligrams per deciliter at 2 hours, you're considered non-diabetic. And I would say that's like a pretty lenient test, because based on this other research in non-diabetic individuals, we should probably never be going above 140. So to be just under 140 at 2 hours, that means you've been elevated above that for 2 hours. So I think we probably need to be looking at like narrower and tighter ranges to really understand true metabolic health, not just absence of disease. So when you also look at these studies, they are looking at 24-hour average glucose levels. And in these studies, they range from about 99 to like 105. And there's a great blog post I've written on the Levels blog that summarizes a lot of this data. But 24-hour average glucose levels in healthy people tend to be around 99 to 105 in these studies. And then if you look at research on optimal fasting glucose levels, so that's your levels first thing in the morning after not having eaten for about 8 hours. If we just look at the standard criteria, under 100 is considered normal, non-diabetic. You wake up, your blood sugar is under 100, you're considered to be not pre-diabetic, not diabetic, healthy. But if you really look deeply in the research, it actually seems like a value between 72 and 85 is a lot better for health than if you're in that upper range, like 85 to 100, which is still considered normal by standard criteria. But if we're looking at like future outcomes like heart disease or even developing diabetes or obesity or things like that, a low normal, so 72 to 85 seems to be quite a bit healthier. So long story short, if you're wearing a CGM, probably shooting to stay the vast majority of the time between 70 and 120, shooting for an average kind of around 100. I think probably it could be tighter than that. My average tends to be around 88 or so throughout the day. And then shooting for a morning glucose between about 72 and 85. And then after meals, I would recommend, and I know a number of the physicians on our advisory board, sort of agree with this based on their professional research and their research-based opinion, is not to really go above 20 to 30 points after a meal. So you eat your meal and then you're going to go up and come down. You don't really want that spike to be more than 30 milligrams per deciliter above your baseline. And when I'm really dialed in and cooking at home, I can easily get it to 10 to 15 as a spike. And that could be a really big, hearty meal. But if I'm really focusing on keeping the refined carbs down and all of that, I can get it to about 10 to 15. So those would kind of be the parameters I'd shoot for. Less than 30 after a meal. Staying under 120 most of the day, and a fasting glucose around 72 to 85.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about metabolic flexibility, because I think that this term can be a little nebulous, can be a little broad, but I think that you define it really well in the context of the mitochondria. So how do you define metabolic flexibility as it relates to mitochondrial health?
Okay, so normally the mitochondria can produce ATP using 3 substrates: glucose, number 1, sugar, amino acids, proteins, and free fatty acids and or ketones. And for the moment, we won't differentiate between the two. But normally those they'd arrive for processing in the electron transport chain, not simultaneously. But let's suppose we stop eating. Hopefully we stop eating, and hopefully we go to sleep. About 8 hours after normally we stop eating, we would pretty much run out of glucose circulating in our bloodstream. We would pretty much deplete glycogen stores, which are the storage form of glucose, and we would shift over to burning free fatty acids and some ketones for our brain. And these would be liberated from our fat cells as insulin would fall after we stopped eating. So it's very much like a hybrid car. Burn gasoline until the gas tank is empty, and we recharge the battery, let's call it our fat stores. And then when the gas tank is empty, we start running on battery power, our fat stores. And the ability to shift from burning sugar or protein to burning free fatty acids should actually happen on a dime as soon as insulin levels fall. But for the vast majority of us, we have what's called insulin resistance, and insulin being elevated prevents free fatty acids from being released from our fat stores. So you could be plenty of fat, nice big fat person, and you could stop eating and you would crash and burn, as so many people do, fasting or eating a ketogenic diet, because you actually can't get to all that fat. So the ability to shift from sugar to fat burning virtually instantaneously actually defines great mitochondrial health. And 80% of us are insulin resistant. And in the new book, there's a really scary paper that I quote. 80% of normal weight people are insulin resistant or metabolically inflexible. 98% of overweight people are metabolically inflexible, and 99.5% of obese people are metabolically inflexible. And it's
terrifying.
Like, it's terrifying. And we wonder why, dementia is, the epidemic that it is. We wonder why cancer is the epidemic it is. We wonder why heart disease, blah, 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 why diabetes is. Because these, in the end, are all really diseases of metabolic inflexibility, of mitochondria unable to shift between fuels.
Yeah. How do you define insulin resistance? Is it on a, is it like more than 6? On a, find the more I learn about insulin resistance, the less I know about it.
So, most labs will say an insulin level of 9 or below is where you want to be. Dr. Dale Bredesen and I say 6 or below is where you want to be. When I started on myself, I had an insulin level of 16. I was insulin resistant, which makes great sense. I run an insulin now around 2. My wife runs an insulin of less than 1. I hate her. I
like
can't
show off.
I know I can't catch her, and we're always going after this. So. But really, a fasting insulin level, and I say this in the books, I'll say this to anyone who would listen. If I had one blood test to tell a patient their fate, and that's all I got one thing, it would be a fasting insulin level. And it just is so powerful predictor of what's going to happen to you. I mentioned this on a podcast this past week. A week ago, I had family members of my patients who didn't listen to me. Both of these people, one a man, one a woman, passed away with metastatic cancer. And for 3 years, both of these individuals, they have very elevated insulin levels, 124, 132. And every time I see them, I said, look, you don't know it, but this is Miracle-Gro to cancer. And, we've got to do this because I said, I don't want to tell you this, but my crystal ball says, you're going to die of cancer. And they go, yeah, right. There's no cancer in my family. And both these people died of metastatic, one uterine cancer and one a gastric cancer. And by the time, it was too late. They both failed chemotherapy, blah, blah, blah. And that's another story. But so the family members were in the office and going, if only they had listened to you. I remember you telling them that this was their fate. And so anyone who will listen, get a fasting insulin level and pay attention to it. Insulin is elevated when you're eating too much simple sugars, too much fructose from fruit or high fructose corn syrup, and quite frankly, too much protein. We eat too much protein in this country. So
it's interesting too. I find, you mentioned before, people, you can be on the path to insulin resistance and have a normal, you don't have to be obese.
Correct.
And you could have a normal, BMI, and if you're looking, for example, at this fasting insulin, or even I like to look at postprandial glucose. So I will, they'll eat a meal and then we look at their glucose, 30-minute intervals for about 2 hours, and you can see, and that's why CGM is like a continuous glucose monitor I'm a big fan of, because you can see how hard your beta cell, your pancreatic cells have to work to bring that glucose level back down. And one of the, from my understanding, and I sort of geek out on insulin resistance, like I mentioned, the more I learn about it, the less I feel like I know. But what we seem to understand about it is that insulin resistance happens in the muscle first. Now, you mentioned the brain, big glucose gobbler, and also just by mass, the muscles are also a very big glucose gobbler. But if you have insulin resistance, if you're not active, you're not that could be that non-exercise activity thermogenesis, like the walking. We were talking on your podcast, like going for a walk to dinner and back and getting the cappuccino like just having this general walking, or things like resistance training. Your muscles are also going to be, they have a GLUT4 receptor. That is an insulin dependent process. They're going to need, if they become insulin resistant, then all of a sudden you have this big glucose sink that's not listening, not listening to insulin. And some of the studies that I've looked at have been able to show that even just one resistance training session has been able to almost completely reverse the resistance that they see in the myocyte, at the insulin receptor on the muscle cell, which I think is like fascinating, and why not everybody is lifting weights or having some kind of where we're moving big muscles, after a meal. That's one of I know you and I have talked about this before. That's one of the best things that you can do to control your insulin sensitivity, is move the glucose into the muscles, because then they don't leave after they're there.
That's right. Yeah, I tell patients that glucose is basically a salesperson that is trying to sell glucose primarily to muscle cells, and it literally knocks on the door and says, "Hey, this person ate some great sugar, and open the door. I want to sell it to you." And the muscle says, "I'm full. I couldn't eat another bite. Go away." And glucose, insulin doesn't take that laying down and comes back with 10 of its friends with a battering ram. So, "No, you're going to take this." And the muscle says, "No, there's not any room in here. Go away." And so insulin says, "Well, look, I've got to get rid of this sugar, and this person is going to thank me. I'm going to store it as fat. And the more my insulin goes up, the more fat I'm going to store, because someday there's going to be a famine, and man, I've got your back. I got you covered." But the problem is, as I found out when I was insulin resistant, the higher your insulin level, the easier it is to make fat out of the food you eat. So I could look at a piece of chocolate cake and gain weight. And so many of my patients, they feel that way. And it's literally, "Oh, I ate like a bird, and, but I keep getting fatter and fatter." Well, it's because we have this elevated insulin level because our muscles aren't hungry. And so you're right. If we exercise them, they go, "Oh, yeah, I'm starving to death. Here, come on. Doors wide open." Yeah. That's why my wife's, insulin level's less than 1. Her muscles go, "Oh, yeah, come on. Right. I'll take everything you got."
In the book, you really go into a lot of detail around some of the physiological impacts that fructose has. So you've already mentioned, when we consume glucose, for example, it has our ghrelin, our satiety hormones are affected. We say, "Hey, there's substrate coming in," and our satiety levels will gradually increase until the point where, leptin reaches a critical mass, and we say, "Okay, it's time to put the fork down." But when we contrast that with fructose, that doesn't happen. So when we consume fructose, like the energy drinks and the caramelized candy, as you were saying, the caramelized candy apples and the sugars and things, that ghrelin doesn't actually change. So what ends up happening, of course, is you're consuming this fructose, you're not feeling full, you're not getting that satiety signal from these appetite regulation centers in the brain, and you continue to consume calories, and of course, obesity and weight gain ensues, and eventually, over time, that compounded effect leads to obesity and other lifestyle diseases that happen with it.
That's right. Well, the thing point I want to make is that there are actually 3 separate fat depots, and they contribute differently. And people are all worried about the obvious one, the one you can see, the subcutaneous or big butt fat, if you will, because it's cosmetically undesirable. But from a metabolic standpoint, it's relatively inert. So having a big butt doesn't mean you're sick. So 80% of obese people are metabolically ill. They get type 2 diabetes, hypertension, lipid problems, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, fatty liver disease, polycystic ovarian disease. All of these chronic metabolic diseases that are all going up in the general population faster than we can deal with them. That's all true. 80% of obese people have these diseases. But that means that 20% do not. 20% of obese people are metabolically healthy. We actually have a name for them, MHO, metabolically healthy obese. They will live a completely normal life, die at a completely normal age, not cost the taxpayer a dime. They even have normal length telomeres, the edges of the chromosomes, the ends that ultimately, when they unravel, that causes cellular aging, and ultimately that causes human aging and death. They have normal length telomeres, these 20%. So just because you weigh more than you should doesn't mean you're sick from it. Conversely, and this is the important part, 40% of the normal weight population, BMI under 30, have the exact same diseases as do the obese. Normal weight people get hypertension, lipid problems, cardiovascular disease, cancer, dementia, diabetes, etc. Now they get it at a lower BMI. Okay, they get it at a lower prevalence, 40% rather than 80%. But when you actually do the math, there are actually more thin sick people in America than there are fat sick people. And when you do the math on the two of them together, it's more than half the US population. And if normal weight people get it too, how can it be about behavior? This actually looks more like exposure. This looks more like cholera or influenza or tuberculosis or COVID-19 for that matter. Some people in a house will get it and some people won't. So the fact is that normal weight people have this problem too. And the reason they have it is not because of the subcutaneous fat. The reason they have it is either because of the visceral fat, the belly fat. And the belly fat only contributes about 4 to 5 kilos on the scale, maybe 8 to 12 pounds. So that doesn't necessarily put you into the obese range. Or worse yet, the liver fat. And the liver fat only has to rise by about 400 grams, less than a pound. And you definitely can't see that on the scale. So if you have a fatty liver, you can be stick thin and still be just as sick as somebody who's got a BMI of 45. So it's not the fat you can see that matters. It's the fat you can't. And the problem is most people don't know that. And they don't know if they've got that problem. And there's a name for this. It's called TOFI, T-O-F-I, thin on the outside, fat on the inside, real medical term, 1,500 Medline citations, coined by Dr. Jimmy Bell at University College London. So my question, not to you, but to your audience is, are you a TOFI? How would you know? How could you know? Does your doctor know? If your doctor knows, why isn't your doctor telling you? And if your doctor does know, what would they do about it? How would they fix it? These are the questions that people have to ask themselves, and they can't ask it if they don't understand it. And that's the reason I wrote the book.
Yeah. And I think, when we think about, NAFLD, when we think about non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, as you were saying, it used to be that it was, the alcoholic's problem that leads to cirrhosis of the liver, et cetera. And now, this human foie gras, as you very accurately describe in the book, some of the, I think some of the common line thinking might be, well, this might be because of the overconsumption of fat or overconsumption of calories, or, it's obesity. But I think that you present this argument that you can really point to fructose as disproportionately driving this NAFLD versus some of these other factors because of the TOFIs, right? Because of the people who are the skinny fats or the thin on the outside, fat on the inside. And you're not necessarily going to be obese if you're over consuming fructose, correct?
That's right. It has nothing to do with whether you're obese or not. It has to do with whether or not your liver's obese or not. That's really what it comes down to. We did a study that I think really sort of addresses this point that you just made. We did this at UCSF. We've published several papers on it, and we actually have a few more to go. What we did is we took 43 children from our obesity clinic at UCSF, all with metabolic syndrome, Latino and African American, all low socioeconomic status, all high sugar consumers because they're all ultra processed food consumers. Okay, and we knew that they had metabolic syndrome because they had the stuff on the back of the neck and they had lab tests that documented it. Right. So what we did was we figured out what they were eating at home, figured out their home diet through questionnaires and pictures. We studied them on their home diet. And then for the next 9 days, we catered their meals. No added sugar. We took the added sugar out of their diet. We took their percent calories from added sugar down from 28% of calories down to 10% of calories. We gave them fruit. That's the only place they got sugar. All the other food was chosen to be no added sugar. We kept their fat content of their diet the same. We kept the protein content of the diet the same. And we kept the carbohydrate content of the diet the same. Now, if you go from 28% of calories of sugar down to 10% of calories of sugar, that's 350 to 400 calories a day gone. And the carbohydrate content of the diet goes down, right? Well, we didn't want that to happen. What we did was we said, we want to keep the carbohydrate content the same, and we want to keep the calorie content the same. So for every molecule of fructose we took out of their diet, we substituted a molecule of glucose. We gave them extra starch. We gave them more refined starch. So in the vernacular, we took the pastries out, we put the bagels in. We took the sweetened yogurt out, we put the baked potato chips in. We took the chicken teriyaki out, we put the turkey hot dogs in. Okay, so we didn't give them good food, we gave them crappy food. We gave them ultra processed food. We gave them kid food. We gave them food kids would eat, but it was no added sugar food. And we gave them a scale. And every day they'd stand on the scale. We'd call them up on the phone, what'd you weigh? And if they were losing weight, eat more in order to keep their weight constant, or even potentially gain weight during the course of the 9 days. Because we're controlling for everything. Right. This is a glucose for fructose exchange. That's what we did. Isocaloric, glucose for fructose exchange. That's how we refer to the study. And then at the end of 10 days, we re-studied all of them. Every aspect of their metabolic health improved. Everything. Their blood pressure went down by 5 points. Their blood glucose went down by 5 points. They had a lactate level at baseline. They didn't anymore. You're not supposed to have a lactate level at baseline. But if your mitochondria are not working, then you have a lactate level. They did. And when we took the sugar out of their diet, they didn't. Their glucose area under the curve went down 8%. Their insulin area under the curve went down 25%, which is enormous, enormous. With no change in calories, no change in weight. And most importantly, their subcutaneous fat stayed exactly the same because they didn't lose any weight. Their visceral fat, belly fat, went down 7%. That's good. Their liver fat went down 22% in 10 days with no change in calories, no change in weight. And as their liver fat went down, their insulin secretion got better. In other words, we reversed the biochemical process that was leading to their insulin resistance and their diabetes. In other words, we reversed their metabolic syndrome just by getting the sugar out of their diet and substituting starch. So can you imagine if we didn't substitute the starch, how much better they would have been? So this proved to us, number one, fructose is bad. Number two, a calorie is not a calorie. Number three, a sugar is not a sugar. And number four, It's the sugar that's in the processed foods that the food industry put there that is specifically causing the disease. And you can undo it even without changing your calories or your weight.
So let's talk a little bit about strength, because often, and I sort of pre-framed it a bit before, I'll have women say to me, I want to lose fat. Like I want to lose weight. Well, they say I want to lose weight. What they really mean is I want to reduce my total my adipose tissue. I don't want to lose brain weight or bone weight or whatever. One of the things that I have found really helpful is shifting the focus away from weight loss or fat loss. We can certainly focus on it, but I like to focus on performance. I like to focus on like the PRs that you were talking about with your teenager who did like, you're a different person now because you did 8 this week and like last week you did 6. Can you talk to some of the maybe reframes, psychological reframes maybe that we can be speaking to our, at least female patients, but certainly anyone, around, yes, maybe fat loss is an admirable goal to work towards, but can we also add in a few other objectives, a few other lifestyle objectives, like being able to put the overhead compartment, or the other one that I like to do is like, can you stand up from a seated position, like on the floor without using your hands? Because I think about my life and I want to be the favorite grandmother. Like that's that's what I'm working towards. So I want to be able to get down on the floor with the toddler and play with and run after the baby and all those different things. So can you speak a little bit about reframing goals?
Yeah. I want to comment also real quick on what you said with the grip strength test. A lot of people don't know that is that single metric is a better predictor of all-cause mortality than almost any other single metric, just to show you how important physical strength is and what that tells you about your health. Okay, so you asked the best questions. You're bringing up lots of memories. So I remember, I don't know how many years into training this was. It wasn't very, very long, but I had this woman that I trained, and then she wanted to bring me her daughter to train. Her daughter was in her 20s, and she was recovering from anorexia. And so she said, Sal, I want to bring you my daughter. It's been recommended that she do some strength training, but she is recovering from anorexia. And I said, okay. I said, I've never worked with anybody with eating disorder. So if it's okay, I'd like to call her therapist and talk to her therapist about appropriate ways to approach nutrition. I want to be very careful, right? I don't want to, because I know fitness can actually push people into dysfunction as well, because you start to become body obsessed, right? So I did. I talked to this therapist, and she was wonderful. And she said, she said, focus on her performance. Just talk about how strong she is. And I thought, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant, because you can't starve yourself and malnourish yourself and get stronger. It just doesn't work that way. So that's what I did. I trained her, and it was all about how strong she was, how much she could squat, how many reps she could do in push-ups, and if she could do a pull-up. And it was exceptional how well it worked. And then I started to apply that to many of my clients, and in particular, women. Women are men also can get pretty body focused, but oftentimes women, this is what they're really focused on. It's like, I just want to look a particular way. And you can do a lot of things wrong by being body focused. You could starve yourself. You could overtrain. You could malnourish yourself because you're so focused on the scale or how your pants fit or how small you feel. But it's really hard, not saying it's impossible, because it's also possible. It's very hard to do a lot of wrong things and get stronger. You have to at least feed yourself properly. You can't overtrain and get stronger. You can't undertrain and get strong. Like, you got to train appropriately to get stronger. So performance is an amazing metric. So if you gauge your progress through your performance, especially for the first few years of training, because at some point you're not going to get any stronger at some point, but at least the first 3 years of training, if you're focused on how strong can I get, how mobile can I get, how many push-ups I can do, what's my stamina like, if you focus on those things, the physical results will follow, right? You'll get that side effect of getting leaner, the side effect of sculpting and shaping your body through performance. If it's body focused, you can oftentimes go the wrong direction, and then it's hard to reverse out of that. So I love performance as a metric. I often focus on that, especially with my female clients. It was like they'd come to me and say, I want to lose 20 pounds. And I'd say, that's wonderful, but here's what we're going to do for the first 3 months. I'm going to try and get you really strong. And they say, well, why? And I talk about metabolism, all that stuff. And luckily I'm very convincing. So I'd get them to trust me. And I'd say, just trust me. We're just going to see how strong we can get you. And then at the end of 3 months, I think you'll be pleased. And they always were. And then also focusing on performance is fun. It's really fun. It doesn't feel as negative. It's like, it's very empowering. It's just a great feeling. It's different than like, and you talked about the scale, man, the scale is, I used to love doing this, right? So when there was one gym that I managed for a while in San Jose over here. And one of my jobs as a general manager was I was also responsible for the sales, how many memberships we sell and training, all that stuff. And I had this really effective technique that I would use sometimes. And I would do this anytime I had a potential member come in, especially a woman who was apprehensive to, the machines and the weights in the gym, right? So I'd take someone through, I want to lose weight. And they'd be like, I just want to do the classes. I just want to do the cardio. I don't want to build muscle. I don't want to get bigger. I don't want to whatever. And I'd talk to them about the benefits. And again, I can be pretty convincing, but we'd get back to my office and they would, no, I don't want to lift weights or whatever. I'd say, no problem. And I'd say this, I'd do this thing. I'd say, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to bring in one of my female trainers. And if you can guess her body weight within 15 pounds, I'll give you a free membership for 2 months. If you can't, then we'll talk about maybe the benefits of strength training. And they would all take that bet. I mean, everybody's like, I could guess within 15 pounds. So then I would get on my intercom and attention staff, so-and-so come to Sal's office, and in would walk in. There was one girl in particular I'm thinking about would come in, and she was this 5'2", very lean, probably 15% body fat, sculpted physique. And she'd walk in and they'd all guess that she was like 90 pounds. Oh, she weighs 90 pounds. And I'd have a scale in my office, and I'd have her stand on the scale, and she's 130 pounds. And they would be just mind blown. How does she weigh 130 pounds? And I'd say, she's got a lot of muscle. Its muscle does not take up a lot of space. And then I would add the cherry on top, and I'd say, can you tell this person what you eat on a regular basis? And she'd say, oh, for breakfast, I had, 4 egg omelet and 3 slices of sourdough toast. And then for lunch, I had a burrito from Chipotle or whatever. And they would be blown away. And I'd say, her metabolism's on fire. Like that's where we want to get with exercise. But yeah, the chasing performance is a great way to build a good relationship with.
And I think as well, when we look at the musculoskeletal system, that's where we actually see metabolic dysfunction show up first, right? When we look at type 2 diabetics, they, they're not able to oxidize fats in the same way that someone who does not have that, or even just metabolic syndrome. You're not quite on the, maybe you don't quite yet have the diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. These people have a problem oxidizing their fats.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's not just the diabetics who we would know years before they became diabetic that they were headed that way. But we're talking about pretty much all the chronic illnesses, and of course the overfat condition, which is the combination of overweight, obesity, and the people who are not overweight but still have excess body fat. Those are the ones typically with too much belly fat. And then those downstream problems, those are all results of poor aerobic function. And this is not a difficult thing to measure in a laboratory or in a facility that has a treadmill test where you can measure the amount of oxygen uptake and carbon dioxide output. And then from that, you get the percent of fat burning and sugar burning at different heart rates. And what you see is in some of these people, even walking at a very slow pace, even they're doing the physical things that they think they should be doing, training slow, and they still can't burn fat because their metabolism is screwed up. And so, there's a lot that has to be done with a lot of these people that have metabolic problems, and by fixing that, we then can start burning fat, and then health returns and fitness builds as well.
So if we've determined that we want to maximize our aerobic capacity, our aerobic efficiency, maybe through increasing the cross-sectional density of our type 1 fibers, I want to talk about your concept of maximum aerobic heart rate. Now we it's just like, 180 minus your age. Like that's it's such a simple thing that anybody can do. But I'm curious about how you determine what a maximum aerobic heart rate is for an individual. Before you came up with that formula, what was the process for you in your clinical process that would help you come up with that number?
Well, I knew there were athletes who were performing well and trained well, and then those who didn't. And so I started looking at what are the features of a healthier athlete versus one who's not healthy, and then started looking at heart rate. This is before heart monitors really came out. I did use a cardiac strap that picked up the heart rate, and so I could accurately see what someone's heart rate was. And I started comparing heart rates with gait, heart rates with breathing rates, heart rate with how people felt. And I saw, for example, that as the heart rate went up as they were running, that their gait would become a little more irregular the higher the heart rate got. And so I interpreted that as a stress. This is a stress. A heart rate of 150 for this person is a stress, and it impairs their gait.
And you'd see what, like more pronation, more weirdness with propulsion? Like what would you see in terms of in
the beginning, it was very subtle. And I had learned a lot about posture and gait. It was a big thing for me. And so to see subtle changes in gait was not that hard. And what I did literally in the beginning was bring a bunch of runners and walkers to a high school track, and I would watch them go round and round. And I would kind of run back and forth. Sometimes I'd run with them, and I would take notes: who's doing what, what's your heart rate, and it was pretty obvious. After a while, you can see these subtle changes, and sometimes you'll see people recover from an irregular gait by slowing down. And so, the best way to think of it is stress. It's a stress. So what does the body do under stress? Well, it doesn't have the same neuromuscular balance. So there becomes this neuromuscular imbalance, and that's where the gait irregularity comes from. And then they breathe faster. It's hard to ask them how they're feeling because it's quite subjective. But you can see it in their faces. Once they get to a heart rate that's far enough over that nice place to be, that I call it a nice place to be. And I realized that nice place, right before their gait became irregular, that I want to keep them just below that, because as they run, they fatigue, even aerobically. We fatigue all day long, and it's not a problem because it's not so severe, and we recover by the next day if we're healthy. So I wanted to be conservative and have that heart rate a little bit lower. And then I realized that this is amazing, because over time, what I started seeing is that people were getting faster at the same heart rate. And I thought they must be burning more fat. That's what I assumed. And I thought this would be a good test for weight loss. We want to make sure people are burning fat. Let's do, they could walk or jog and If they get faster at the same heart rate, then we know they're on the right metabolic pathway to lose body fat. Well, that certainly is true, but the fact that they got faster at the same heart rate was a huge thing for me from a coaching standpoint, because my goal with an athlete was to A, help them perform better, and B, keep them healthy. And that was a big key to that.
All right. If you enjoyed that conversation, you are going to love the next video that I have queued up for you. We are going to be talking about eating for energy, mental clarity, and weight loss. It's right there.
Like you were to look at yourself in the mirror naked, like you feel great. You're like, oh my God, I'm hot. Like I look amazing. My energy level's high. And you were still 140 pounds. Would you rather that, or would you rather be 130 pounds and be unhappy?